You walk into a room. You feel a shift in the air. You wonder if your shirt is wrinkled, if your hair looks odd, or if your shoes squeak when you step. Maybe you said something strange a few minutes ago, and now it plays over in your mind. You can almost feel the imaginary eyes watching, judging, noticing every little thing. The truth is, they probably aren't. This is what psychologists call the spotlight effect. It's the idea that we think people notice us far more than they actually do. It comes from a basic part of being human. We're the center of our own lives. We live inside our own heads, thinking about our thoughts, worrying about our actions, replaying our conversations. So it makes sense that we assume others are doing the same, focused on us, observing us, remembering every small thing we do. But they're not. Think of it like this. You remember that time you stumbled over your words during a meeting? Or when you dropped your phone in a quiet room and it made a loud, awkward noise? You might think about it days later, but ask yourself, do you remember when someone else did something similar? Probably not. Not unless it was dramatic or repeated over and over. Most of the time, you forget about it. Other people do the same with you. That moment that's stuck in your head might not have even registered in theirs. Imagine you're wearing a shirt with a big stain on it. Maybe you spilled coffee earlier. You notice it. You think everyone will see it. You start planning ways to hide it. Carry your bag in front. Keep your arms crossed. Avoid turning sideways. Later, someone asks what you were doing that day, and you mention the shirt. They have no idea what you're talking about. They never noticed. They were too busy thinking about their own problems, their own meetings, their own coffee stains. This doesn't mean people never notice anything. Sometimes they do. But the degree to which they notice or how long they think about it is far less than we expect. Our minds take up all our attention, so we assume we're taking up that much space in other people's minds too. We aren't. Researchers tested this idea. In one study, they asked college students to wear an embarrassing t-shirt, one with a big picture of a pop star that was meant to stand out. Then they asked the students how many people they thought noticed the shirt. The students guessed that about half the people in the room noticed. But when the researchers asked the other people, only a small percentage had even paid attention. The students wearing the shirts had greatly overestimated how much attention they got. That's the spotlight effect in action. You feel like there's a spotlight on you, but no one's holding the light. Think about this in everyday life. You post something online and then start worrying. Did it sound dumb? Was it too long? Was it boring? You imagine people reading it and judging, but most people scroll past quickly. They might not even see it. Or if they do, they move on without thinking twice. That awkward message you sent at midnight? Maybe they smiled and went to bed. Maybe they never even opened it. In public speaking, this effect hits hard. You stand on a stage and feel your voice shake. You worry that people can tell you're nervous. You think they're watching your hands tremble or noticing how fast you're breathing. But to the audience, you're just another speaker. Most of them aren't looking that closely. Some are checking their phones. Some are thinking about dinner. Some are tired. They aren't analyzing your every move. Even if you mess up a line or lose your place, most won't notice. And if they do, they forget it quickly. The spotlight effect doesn't only show up in big moments. It shows up when you're walking down the street and trip over a crack. It shows up when you laugh too loud and then go quiet. It shows up when you wave at someone who wasn't waving at you. In all these moments, you feel exposed. But the exposure is mostly in your head. The root of the spotlight effect is self-focus. We're always inside our own experience. We can't step out of our heads. That means we see everything from our own perspective. That makes our actions seem bigger than they really are. When we mess up, we think everyone saw it. When we succeed, we think everyone noticed. But most of the time, people are just like us, busy thinking about themselves. This can be comforting once you understand it. The pressure fades. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to act like every move is being watched. You can relax a little. You can stop performing all the time. You can accept that most people are too wrapped up in their own thoughts to care about yours. Sometimes, the spotlight effect leads us to avoid doing things we want to do. We don't speak up in a meeting because we're afraid of sounding wrong. We don't wear the clothes we like because we think they'll attract too much attention. We don't ask the question, start the project, or try the new thing because we imagine a crowd watching and judging. But if the spotlight isn't real, those fears lose their power. You can start small. Next time you make a mistake in front of others, pause and ask yourself, will they remember this tomorrow? Will it change anything? Often the answer is no. Then ask yourself the same question about a time when someone else made a mistake in front of you. Did you remember it a week later? A day later? Chances are you moved on quickly. The more you notice the spotlight effect, the easier it gets to ignore. You start to act without that heavy feeling of being watched. You can make decisions based on what matters to you, not based on imagined judgment. You can speak more freely, dress more comfortably, move more naturally. And strangely, when you do that, when you stop worrying about being watched, you become easier to connect with. People like authenticity. They notice confidence, but not the kind that tries to impress. They notice when someone feels at ease in their own skin. That comes from letting go of the spotlight, not chasing it. You'll still have moments when you feel exposed. That's part of being human. But each time you remember the spotlight effect, you loosen its grip. You remind yourself that your thoughts are not being broadcast, that the room isn't watching your every move, that your mind can build illusions, and that most people are simply too busy with their own lives to notice the tiny thing you just said or did. You start learning something new. Maybe it's photography, maybe it's chess, or maybe it's just cooking. You pick up a few basics, watch a couple of videos, and try it out yourself. You feel like you're getting the hang of it fast. It all makes sense. It feels natural. You tell yourself, I'm actually pretty good at this. But something strange happens when you start digging deeper. The more you learn, the more confusing it gets. The rules aren't so simple anymore. You notice little things you never saw before. Mistakes, gaps, blind spots. You meet someone who's truly experienced, and suddenly you feel like you barely understand the subject at all. The confidence you once had starts to fall apart. This is what's known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's a cognitive bias. That means it's a pattern in the way we think that leads us to make errors in judgment. In this case, the error is overestimating our own ability. The less we know, the more confident we feel. It's not arrogance. It's not pride. It's simply that when you don't know enough, you don't even know what you don't know. There are entire layers of complexity hidden from view. Imagine a map. You've only explored one small corner, but because it's all you've seen, you assume it's the whole thing. You don't realize the rest even exists. So your picture of your own ability is based on a small and incomplete understanding. This happens in all kinds of areas. A new driver might feel they're great at driving because they've never been in an accident, but they've never driven in heavy rain, never merged into highway traffic at rush hour, never had to make a split-second decision. They mistake safety for skill, but their experience is limited. The same thing happens with people who just started going to the gym. A few weeks in, they might start giving advice to others. They feel like they've figured out the basics of fitness, but they're unaware of deeper principles: form, recovery, nutrition, biomechanics. Their confidence is high, but their understanding is shallow. Even in conversation, this shows up. Someone who's read one article on a topic will speak about it like an expert, not because they want to deceive anyone, but because they believe they know enough to have a strong opinion. The gaps in their knowledge are invisible to them. This is where the Dunning-Kruger curve comes in. Picture a graph. On the left side is knowledge. On the vertical axis is confidence. In the beginning, as knowledge increases just a little, confidence shoots up. You feel like you're on a mountain. You think, this isn't so hard. This place is sometimes called Mount Stupid. You don't mean to be wrong. You just can't see how much you're missing. Then comes the drop. As you learn more, your confidence dips. You start to understand how complicated the subject really is. You feel like you know less, even though you actually know more. This valley is sometimes called the Valley of Despair. It's uncomfortable. You may question your ability, but it's also the start of real learning. Eventually, with more time, practice, and exposure, your knowledge grows, and your confidence begins to climb again. But this time, it's different. You've been humbled by complexity. You know what you don't know, You see how much there still is to learn. You speak with more caution, more care. You're less certain, but more accurate. One example of this is public speaking. Many people, after giving one good presentation, feel they're natural speakers. They think, this is easy. But professional speakers know that delivering a message well requires timing, tone, clarity, structure, and connection with the audience. They know how hard it is to do it consistently. The beginner doesn't see that yet. Another example is in parenting. New parents might read a book or take a class and think they're ready. But the actual experience brings up situations they never imagined: sleep regression, illness, tantrums in public, conflicting advice. They begin to see that parenting is not just about having answers, it's about making judgment calls in the middle of chaos. The Dunning-Kruger Effect also explains why truly skilled people often doubt themselves. They've seen so much, learned so much, that they're aware of their limitations. They know how easy it is to be wrong. So they speak with less confidence, not because they know less, but because they know more. The more clearly you see the landscape, the harder it is to pretend you've mastered it. This gap between confidence and competence can lead to problems. In group settings, the most confident person may get listened to more, even if they're the least informed. In job interviews, someone who overestimates their ability might get hired over someone who is better but more modest. In relationships, people may give advice with certainty, unaware that they're just repeating common myths or personal biases. It doesn't mean you should never trust your instincts, but it's worth pausing sometimes and asking, am I seeing the full picture or just a piece of it? Self-awareness is key. Learning to notice when you're on Mount Stupid is a skill in itself. It requires humility. It requires curiosity. It requires the willingness to be wrong and to keep going anyway. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't about blaming people. We all go through it. It's part of learning. The real danger comes when we get stuck in that early stage, when we stop questioning, when we stop learning, when we mistake early success for final mastery. So the next time something feels easy, when you feel like you've already figured it out, it might be worth slowing down. Not to doubt yourself, but to check in, to look around and ask, what am I missing? Often the answer is hidden in the things you haven't even thought to ask yet. That's where growth lives. And maybe that's the trick of it all. Not to fear being wrong, but to get better at noticing when your confidence is writing checks your knowledge can't quite cash. You believe something. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's big. But once you believe it, your brain does something strange. It starts working in the background to make sure you stay right. Not to find truth. Not to test your idea. Just to keep you from changing your mind. That's confirmation bias. Imagine you think someone doesn't like you. Maybe they didn't laugh at a joke you made, or they took a while to reply to your message. Now, without knowing it, you start watching them more closely. You look for more signs that they're cold or distant. You notice when they don't greet you first. You replay old moments where they seemed off. You don't look for the times they smiled, or the times they did say something kind. Your brain collects only the evidence that fits your first thought. This doesn't just happen with people. It happens with news, with politics, with health, with almost everything. You watch a video that supports your opinion. It makes sense to you. It feels right. So the next time, you look for more content just like it. You feel smarter. You feel sure. But your brain is playing a quiet trick. It's building a wall around your belief. It's letting things in, but only things that match what's already there. You avoid disagreement without noticing. You listen to people who talk like you. You follow people who already agree. The more you do this, the more convinced you feel. But your confidence grows even if the belief is flawed. The brain cares more about feeling safe than being accurate. Imagine a courtroom where the judge only listens to the prosecution. The defense speaks, but the judge turns off the mic. Over time, every case ends the same way. Guilty. That's what confirmation bias does. It silences the other side. Think about the first time you believed something strongly. Maybe you thought a certain diet worked best. Maybe you believed one political view was more moral than the other. From that point on, your brain helped you prove yourself right. You saw articles that confirmed your view. You found studies that supported it. but you skipped over the ones that challenged it. You told yourself they were flawed or biased or just wrong. That's the trick. You didn't ignore them on purpose. You didn't lie to yourself. You just didn't see them the same way. Confirmation bias feels like being logical. You think you're looking at the facts, you think you're weighing the evidence, but really you're filtering, quietly, constantly, automatically. It happens in relationships too. Imagine someone tells you that your friend is dishonest. You say no at first, you trust them. But then, days later, they say something that sounds a bit off. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's nothing. But now you notice it, now you wonder. And soon your brain starts stacking little signs. A look, a pause, a change of subject. None of these things meant much before, but now they do, because the idea has been planted, and your brain is confirming it. Sometimes, the bias makes you dig in. When someone argues with you, it doesn't change your mind. It pushes you deeper into your belief. You start defending harder, not because you're sure, but because it feels uncomfortable to be wrong. That discomfort pushes the brain to protect itself. So it gathers reasons to hold on. And the more pressure you feel, the stronger the defense becomes. This happens in science too. Researchers test a theory, but if they expect a certain result, they may notice the data that supports it more than the data that doesn't. That's why double-blind studies exist, to protect against this kind of mental trap. But outside of labs, in daily life, we don't use those protections. We let the bias run free. Social media feeds the bias too. Algorithms show you things you already like. They feed you more of the same. Over time, your view of the world narrows. You think more people agree with you than they do. You think your side is more obvious, more logical, more true. But maybe the other side is thinking the same thing, seeing the same patterns, feeling the same certainty. The bias also plays out in how we ask questions. If you think someone is guilty, you might ask, "Why did you lie?" instead of "What happened?" The way you frame the question already assumes an answer, and the answer you get will likely match what you expect. That's how the trap works. It's not just about what you look for. It's also about how you ask, how you listen, and how you interpret. Your memory isn't safe either. If you already believe something, you'll remember events in a way that supports that belief. You reshape the past to fit the present idea. Not because you're trying to be dishonest, but because the brain wants consistency. It wants your story to make sense, and it will rewrite whatever it needs to keep the story straight. Even your searches are biased. Type something into a search engine. If you type, "Why is coffee bad for you?" you'll find reasons it's bad. If you type, "Why is coffee good for you?" you'll find the opposite. Your question already shaped the answer. The result confirms what you asked. It confirms what you likely already believed. This doesn't mean we're all wrong. It doesn't mean beliefs are useless, but it means we should test them, gently, carefully. We should be aware that our brain has a pattern, a loop, that reinforces itself without asking for permission. Ask yourself, when was the last time you changed your mind about something important? Not because someone convinced you in an argument, but because you looked at something differently. You heard something unexpected. You paused. You considered. If that hasn't happened in a while, the bias might be working quietly in the background. When we're tired, the bias gets stronger. We don't want to think deeply. We just want things to feel familiar. So we accept what we already believe, and we let the loop continue. That's why these patterns are so hard to break. They comfort us, they protect our view of the world, but they can also keep us from seeing clearly. So next time you feel certain, truly certain, pause. Ask yourself, am I right, or am I just repeating what I already believed? Did I challenge this thought, or did I just build a case for it? Sometimes the most honest answer is, I don't know. And that's okay. Not knowing is where real thought begins. You say you care about being honest, but you just told a lie. It was small, maybe, but still a lie. You explain it to yourself. You didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. You didn't want to cause a scene. You weren't ready to tell the truth. It wasn't the right time. You find a reason, and that reason makes the lie feel less like a lie. This is how cognitive dissonance works. It's the feeling of discomfort you get when your actions don't line up with your beliefs. Your mind doesn't like contradiction, so it starts bending things, thoughts, memories, beliefs, to make everything fit together again. You twist the picture just a little until what happened feels okay, or at least understandable. You tell yourself you care about health, but you skip your workout. You eat fast food. You say it's just one day, or I've had a long week. You say you'll start again tomorrow. You say you're too tired, too busy, too overwhelmed. And maybe you are, but that doesn't change the fact that what you're doing doesn't match what you believe. So the brain works to fix the gap, not always by changing the behavior, but by changing the story around it. Maybe you're in a relationship. You don't feel respected. You're not happy, but you've been with this person for years. You've shared memories. You've made plans. You've told yourself this is love. And so when something feels off, you explain it away. They're just stressed. It's not always like this. No one's perfect. You tell yourself these things because the truth, that you might not be happy in something you believed in, feels like too much. And so you hold on to the belief, even as the facts twist around it. This isn't lying. Not really. It's something quieter, more automatic, more hidden. The brain is trying to protect you. It doesn't want you to feel like you're betraying yourself. It wants consistency. If you think of yourself as kind, you'll avoid facing the moments when you've been cruel. If you think of yourself as hardworking, you'll block out the times you've cut corners. If you think of yourself as open-minded, you'll ignore the views you refuse to hear. And all of this happens in the background. You're not trying to deceive yourself. It's just happening. Slowly. Subtly. A person might believe the environment is important. They care about climate change. They believe in conservation. But they drive a gas-guzzling SUV. They take frequent flights. They buy fast fashion. The actions don't match the belief. And so the mind finds ways to make the mismatch feel smaller. I recycle. I donate. One person doesn't make that big of a difference. These thoughts smooth over the tension, even if they don't change the outcome. Another person might value loyalty. They see themselves as a loyal friend, partner, sibling. But then they gossip. They betray someone's trust. And rather than question the belief, they shift the story. They deserved it. They would have done the same. It wasn't really betrayal. The belief remains. The behavior stays. And the gap between them gets blurred. Sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes the discomfort becomes too loud to ignore. That's when beliefs start to change. You might find yourself slowly letting go of old ideas. You might admit that you were wrong, that what you believed doesn't work for you anymore. But even that shift takes time, and it usually begins with that same quiet tension, that feeling that something just doesn't sit right. Cognitive dissonance shows up everywhere, at work, at home, online, in politics, in religion, in parenting, in personal identity. It's there when someone says they believe in fairness but supports unfair rules. It's there when someone values honesty but keeps secrets. It's there when someone wants peace but causes conflict. And every time it happens, the brain steps in with a story. Not because you're trying to be fake, but because you're trying to feel okay. This is why some people double down on beliefs when they're challenged. If you've built your identity around an idea about who you are, what you stand for, what kind of person you think you are, it can be painful to hear that idea questioned, even if the evidence is there, even if the facts are clear. The more invested you are in the belief, the harder it is to let it go. And so the dissonance grows. The mind twists harder to defend the story. That's how smart people can believe things that don't make sense. How kind people can do things that hurt others. How good intentions can lead to bad outcomes. It's not about intelligence. It's about comfort. Mental comfort. You see this a lot with habits. People want to believe they're in control. But the reality of addiction or compulsion or even just routine can go against that belief. So they tell themselves they choose it. I can stop anytime. It helps me relax. It's not a problem. These aren't always lies. They're defenses. Defenses against the truth that there's a gap between who you want to be and what you're doing. You also see it in decisions. After making a hard choice, the brain often shifts to support the path you picked. It downplays the benefits of the road not taken. This is why people who choose one side of a debate often become more certain over time. The choice itself strengthens the belief. It helps reduce the feeling that you could have been wrong. Cognitive dissonance doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. It's a feature of the mind, not a flaw. But it's powerful. It can shape your memories, influence your choices, color your relationships. It can keep you in situations that don't serve you. It can stop you from growing. It can keep you stuck. But when you notice it, really notice it, it starts to lose its grip. That moment when you feel the pull, when you catch yourself explaining something away, when you pause before justifying a choice, that's the crack in the system. That's where change begins, not with shame, not with self blame, just with awareness. You might not always catch it, and even when you do, you might still twist things. But each time you pause, each time you sit in that tension a little longer, you give yourself the chance to make a different choice, to rewrite the story, not just bend it. Cognitive dissonance isn't a bug in the brain, it's a balancing act. Your mind trying to protect your sense of self, your narrative, your peace. But peace built on shaky beliefs doesn't last. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit when something doesn't line up. It's not easy, it's not fast, but it's real. You stand in front of the shelf. There are 20 kinds of toothpaste. Some promise extra whitening. Others claim to fight plaque longer. One says it's for sensitive teeth. Another has charcoal. You don't know if charcoal even helps. You scan each box. Then you look again. You were supposed to be in and out. Now, 5 minutes later, you still haven't picked one. This is what happens when there are too many choices. Your brain stalls. What should have been simple turns into something complicated. You start second guessing. You want to make the right decision, but the more options you have, the harder it becomes to decide. This is called choice overload. Most people think having more choices is better. You feel more in control. You believe you can find something that's exactly right. That might be true up to a point, but when the choices keep coming, your brain shifts. It stops seeing options and starts seeing pressure. Each choice you don't make is one more thing you've rejected. That feels like loss, even if you don't notice it. You worry about missing out on the best one. You get stuck. Imagine you're picking a movie. You open the streaming app. You scroll and scroll. You see something interesting, but not quite right. You keep going. 30 minutes later, you haven't watched anything. You've only searched. At that point, the choice itself becomes the experience. You close the app, you give up. This isn't rare. It happens to millions of people every day. Choice overload doesn't just waste time. It drains energy. It makes you feel worse about the decision you finally make. Researchers found that when people are given more options, they feel less satisfied with their final pick, even if it's a good one. They keep thinking about what they didn't choose. They imagine how the other options might have been better. That lingering doubt stays with them. It's the cost of too much freedom. Here's another example. You go to a cafe, they serve coffee, but not just coffee. They have cold brew, nitro, pour over, espresso, cappuccino, macchiato, flat white, mocha, and a long list of milk options. You just wanted a cup of coffee. Now you feel like you need a guide. You hesitate. You start wondering what people behind you will think if you ask questions. You pick something at random. It arrives. It's fine, but you're not even sure what it is. The whole experience feels worse than it should. The problem isn't just having options. The problem is how we deal with them. The brain prefers simple, binary decisions. Left or right, yes or no, A or B. Once the choices multiply, the brain slows down. It starts doing comparisons. This one is good, but that one is cheaper. That one has better reviews, but this one has faster delivery. You start creating mental lists. You try to rank them, but your list changes every time you look again. This can happen with big life choices too. Jobs, apartments, even relationships. When you're faced with too many options, you start looking for perfect. But perfect doesn't exist. So you keep browsing, hoping the next one will solve the dilemma. In the meantime, you ignore the good ones. You hesitate too long. Sometimes you end up with nothing. Stores and apps know this happens. They design menus and product lines with that in mind. Some limit options to nudge you into making quicker choices. Others do the opposite. They flood you with choices so you'll stay longer, even if you leave with less. Streaming services, dating apps, and online stores use endless scrolls. There's always one more thing to look at, and that one more thing creates the illusion of progress. But it doesn't always lead to action. It just keeps you busy. There was a study where researchers set up a jam tasting booth. On one day, they offered 6 kinds of jam. On another day, they offered 24. More people stopped at the booth when there were 24, but more people bought jam when there were only 6. This pattern shows up across industries. More choice gets attention, less choice gets results. Even when you do make a choice, you don't feel as confident about it when you had too many options. This is called post-decision regret. You think, maybe I should have gone with the other one. You imagine the other toothpaste, the other coffee, the other movie. You think about it even if your choice works out fine. You second guess yourself. To reduce choice overload, some people set rules. Always pick the first thing that meets your needs. Limit your browsing to 10 minutes. Use filters. Ask someone else to choose. These methods work because they reduce mental load. They take pressure off. They let your brain focus. But in daily life, you won't always have that kind of control. So the next time you feel stuck between too many options, remember that it's not just indecision. It's your brain doing the best it can under pressure. You're not lazy. You're overloaded. You're not bad at decisions. You're human. Think of how much choice fills your day. What to wear, what to eat, what to listen to, where to go, who to reply to, whether to scroll one more time. These choices don't feel big, but they add up. They chip away at your energy. That's why some people wear the same outfit every day or eat the same breakfast. It's not boring. It's a way to save their brain for decisions that matter. We make over 30,000 decisions a day. Most are small, but the small ones wear you down. Choice overload isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a slow pressure, a background hum. You feel it when you delay, when you reopen tabs, when you keep shopping but never buy, when you pick something but keep wondering if you picked wrong. There's no perfect solution, but being aware of it helps. When you notice yourself freezing, take a step back. Ask what you need, not what you want. Ask what's good enough, not what's best. Let some choices go. Not every decision deserves full analysis. In a world full of options, choosing less can feel strange. It can feel like giving up something. But what you're gaining is peace, space to breathe, time to focus. And sometimes that's worth more than the thing you didn't pick. You're sitting in a meeting. The group is discussing an idea. Everyone seems to agree that it's a good plan. But something feels off to you. Maybe the numbers don't add up. Maybe the risks are being ignored. Maybe the timeline is too tight. Whatever the problem is, you see it clearly in your mind. But you stay quiet. You don't speak up. You tell yourself it's not worth it. Everyone else agrees, so maybe you're the one who's wrong. Or maybe you just don't want to look like the person who ruins the flow. So you nod along, you go with it, you let the moment pass. This is groupthink. It's what happens when people in a group stop thinking like individuals. They start thinking like a unit, not in a collaborative or creative way, but in a way that avoids conflict. Groupthink is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't force you. It gently pushes you to fit in. It rewards you for going along. It punishes you in subtle ways for raising your hand and saying something different. You may not even notice it happening. That's what makes it so strong. You believe you're being reasonable. You tell yourself you're being a team player. But somewhere inside, you're silencing a thought that matters. And when many people do this at once, the group moves forward with false confidence. No one challenges the idea. No one adds a missing piece. No one stops to ask, are we sure? Groupthink doesn't need orders from above. It grows in any space where people want to belong. That can be a workplace, a friend group, a family, an online community. It works best when the group has a shared goal and wants to move quickly. If everyone is tired, stressed, or under pressure, the chances of groupthink go up. If there's a strong leader with a firm opinion, the chances go up even more. Let's imagine a simple example. A design team is working on a new product. The deadline is close. The manager loves the current direction. During the meeting, she says, I think this version is perfect. Let's finalize it today. Everyone nods. There's a pause. Someone wants to speak. He notices a flaw that might confuse users. But he remembers how the last person who questioned a decision got brushed off. He stays silent. Someone else has doubts too, but tells herself it's not her place. The meeting ends. The product launches. Users get confused. The flaw causes a drop in sales. The team wonders how no one caught it. This isn't about intelligence. Smart people fall into groupthink all the time. In fact, the smarter the group, the more they might trust each other's silence as a sign of agreement. But silence is not always agreement. Sometimes it's hesitation, sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's someone doing the math in their head and deciding it's not worth the social cost of speaking up. Groupthink is not always dramatic. Sometimes it just leads to bland decisions. The group picks the safe option, the one that won't offend, the one that looks like past successes. Innovation dies in those moments. Creativity fades. The group becomes efficient but dull, fast but predictable. You may have seen this play out in your own life. Maybe you were with friends choosing where to eat. Someone says a place you don't like. Everyone agrees quickly. You want to suggest another spot, but you keep it to yourself. You don't want to be that person. You go along. The food's bad. The mood drops. But no one says anything. Everyone thinks they're the only one who didn't enjoy it. Or maybe you were part of a planning group, a school project, a work proposal, a wedding committee. The loudest voice in the room sets the tone. Everyone else adjusts. The meeting ends with a plan that no one loves, but no one objects to. You all carry it out. It works, but just barely. Later, in small conversations, you learn that many people had the same concerns you did, but no one spoke them aloud. Why does this happen so often? Part of the answer is comfort. Humans are social. We like harmony. We want to feel safe in groups. Disagreeing puts you on the edge. It creates tension. It risks judgment. Your brain registers that as danger. Another reason is fear of embarrassment. What if you're wrong? What if you speak up and others roll their eyes or dismiss you? That's a real social risk. Even if it's not life-threatening, your brain still reacts to it. Sometimes there's a belief that the group knows best. If no one else sees the problem, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe the group has more information. So you defer. You doubt yourself. That's natural too. People don't want to seem arrogant or difficult. They'd rather stay quiet than be the person who slows things down. But silence is not neutral. When people hold back, the group suffers. Bad ideas go unchallenged. Important warnings stay hidden. Opportunities for growth are lost. And the sad part is, no one ever knows what was missed. The decision gets made. The train moves forward. The cost shows up later, quietly, in outcomes that could have been better. There are ways to notice when groupthink is happening. If a group agrees too quickly, that's a sign. If there's little discussion or debate, be cautious. If no one asks questions, slow down. If the leader speaks first and no one challenges them, there may be pressure in the room that no one is naming. If people look unsure but stay silent, listen to that silence. It's not easy to speak up, especially when you feel alone. But the voice that breaks groupthink doesn't have to be loud. It can start with a question. Can I raise a concern? What if we looked at this another way? Does anyone else feel unsure about this? Questions open the door. They invite others in. Sometimes others were just waiting for someone to go first. Being the person who asks is not about being difficult. It's about being careful, being thoughtful. It's about giving the group a real chance to think, to adjust, to grow. You don't have to be right. You just have to be honest. Over time, teams and groups that welcome disagreement get stronger. They learn to explore ideas instead of rushing to agreement. They make better choices. They build trust that runs deeper than politeness. They become places where people can speak freely without fear. But it starts with noticing that moment. The pause before you speak, the feeling in your gut, the question in your mind. That's the moment when groupthink begins or ends. You get to decide. You walk down a busy street. Someone ahead of you collapses on the sidewalk. It's clear something is wrong. People notice. Some slow down. A few glance, then walk faster. No one stops. You feel a strange hesitation. You wait. Maybe someone else will help first. This is the bystander effect. It happens when many people are around, but no one takes action. The presence of others creates a sense of shared responsibility, but that responsibility gets diluted. Each person thinks someone else will do something, so no one does. You may believe that in a real emergency you would step in. Most people think that, but research shows that the more people are present, the less likely it is that anyone helps. This has been studied many times in many ways, and the results are consistent. We underestimate how strong this effect can be. Picture this. You're in a park. A man falls from his bike. He isn't moving. A dozen people see it. Some look concerned. One person pulls out their phone. Another stands still. You're watching too. You hesitate. You think, is he okay? Maybe someone already called for help. You wait. A few minutes pass. Still, no one helps. This is not unusual. In fact, it's predictable. Why does this happen? Part of it is social. We look to others to guide how we should react. If no one else is stepping forward, we take that as a signal that maybe it's not serious. Maybe it's not our job. Maybe we'll look foolish. This is called pluralistic ignorance. Everyone thinks everyone else knows what to do, while no one actually does anything. Another part of it is something psychologists call diffusion of responsibility. That means we feel less personal pressure to act when other people are around. We assume the burden is shared, but when everyone assumes that, no one takes charge. Now imagine something different. You're walking alone, and someone collapses in front of you. No one else is nearby. In this case, you're far more likely to take action. Why? Because it's clear that the responsibility is yours. You don't assume someone else will step in. You don't wait for a social signal. You just act. The bystander effect doesn't make people uncaring. It just plays with our expectations. We expect emergencies to trigger urgency. But that urgency fades when many people share the moment. The pressure to act becomes scattered and vague. One of the most well-known cases linked to the bystander effect happened in 1964. A woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment in New York City. News reports at the time claimed that dozens of people heard her cries but did nothing. That story sparked public outrage. The details of the case were later corrected, but it still led to widespread interest in studying this effect. Since then, experiments have tested it in controlled ways. One famous study placed participants in rooms where they believed others were present, even if those others were only voices played through speakers. When someone pretended to have a seizure over the intercom, participants who thought they were alone were far more likely to help. When they believed others were listening too, their reaction time slowed, or they didn't help at all. The bystander effect shows up in small, everyday moments too. Think about a time when someone dropped their groceries in a store. Did you help? Did someone else? Or did people just keep walking? These aren't life or death emergencies, but the mental process is the same. In crowded situations, helping often requires a conscious decision. You have to break through the inertia. You have to step outside the norm. That can feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it's not fear that stops us. It's uncertainty. We're not sure what's happening. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to seem dramatic. But that hesitation can cost time. And sometimes time matters. There are ways to break the bystander effect. One of the most effective is to take responsibility directly. If you're in a group and you see someone in need, pointing to a specific person and saying, "You call for help," makes it clear. The diffusion vanishes. That person knows it's their job now. That simple act changes the dynamic. Emergency training often includes this. First aid instructors teach people not just how to help, but how to take charge. Say what needs to be done. Be clear. Be direct. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for others to decide. The bystander effect also plays out online. Think about a social media post where someone is clearly struggling. They write something worrying. You see comments like, "You got this," or "sending love." You may think someone else has already reached out in private. You might like the post and scroll on. But often, the person doesn't hear from anyone directly. Everyone thinks someone else has it covered. There's a quiet isolation built into moments like these, surrounded by attention, yet still alone. That's the bystander effect in digital form. Even in professional settings, the effect shows up. In meetings, someone raises a concern. It goes ignored. Not because people don't care, but because they expect someone else to address it. In classrooms, a student may look confused, but the teacher doesn't notice because the rest of the class stays silent. Each student assumes the others understand. The bystander effect teaches us that inaction is not always about choice. Sometimes it's about context. The people around us shape our behavior more than we'd like to admit. And yet, once we know about it, we can act differently. Awareness doesn't erase the effect, but it gives us a tool. We can recognize the moment. We can push against the hesitation. Not perfectly, but more often. In those small windows, the ones where action feels uncertain, a single person can shift everything. A step forward can snap others into motion. A calm voice can break the silence. A clear decision can cut through confusion. Sometimes the hardest part is not the action itself, but believing it's your place to take it. And that's the quiet trick of the bystander effect. It doesn't block your help. It just convinces you to wait. You wake up feeling good, you got a promotion, or maybe you nailed something small, like a perfect comment in a meeting. You think, I earned that. You feel sharp, deserving, smart. But when things don't go your way, the weather was bad. The instructions were unclear. Someone else dropped the ball. It wasn't really your fault, and your brain, quietly and without asking, agrees with you. This is called the self-serving bias. It's the mind's quiet trick. When things go right, we take credit. When they don't, we shift the blame. It's not loud. It's not angry. It's quiet. It's just there. A subtle tilt in how we explain life to ourselves. You're late to a meeting. You tell yourself there was traffic. Your calendar app didn't remind you. Maybe someone moved the meeting and didn't send a proper invite. But when someone else shows up late, you think they're careless, disorganized, lazy. The same action, different judgment. One is you, the other is someone else. That's how the bias works. It's not just about protecting your ego, it's about consistency. Your brain wants to make sense of things, so it shapes reality to keep your story straight. Let's say you study for an exam. You pass. You say you worked hard. You stayed focused. You earned it. But if you fail, you say the questions were unfair. The teacher was too harsh. The material was never covered in class. You'll even convince yourself that none of it matters. You move the goalposts to keep your image intact. It shows up at work, too. If a project goes well, you tell others you led the charge. You had the right ideas. But if it fails, you start seeing how your team didn't pull their weight, how the client kept changing their mind. You might not even notice you're doing it. That's the trap. The self-serving bias doesn't need you to lie. It simply asks you to lean a little, to favor one angle of the truth more than the other. In group settings, the effect grows stronger. Take team sports. When a team wins, each player feels they played a key role. When it loses, fingers point. It was the defense, the coach's poor timing, the weather, the referee. It's never the whole team's fault. It's someone else. This helps people protect themselves. Nobody wants to feel useless or at fault, especially in front of others. So the brain runs its little script. You equals good. Mistakes equals not your fault. You'll see it in relationships too. After an argument, you go over everything you said. You remember how calm you were, how the other person raised their voice first. You recall only the parts where you tried to listen. You forget the part where you interrupted. You overlook the moment you rolled your eyes or slammed the door. But you remember what they did clearly. The self-serving bias edits the scene in your favor, not with lies, with focus. It narrows what you remember. Even in traffic, you get cut off. You think, what a jerk. But when you cut someone off, you say you didn't see them. You were running late. You had a reason. You always do. It goes deeper, too. Think about how people talk about luck. When someone wins the lottery, we say they got lucky. When someone builds a business, we say they're talented. But when we fail at something, we rarely say it's bad luck. We say the system was rigged. We say the game wasn't fair. But when we win, that's all us. Every time. The brain builds a world where we are consistent, capable, and right. It filters the facts, not to lie, but to protect our sense of self. The bias smooths over the sharp edges. It keeps your image intact. And it does this over and over without asking. You're in a group chat. A friend sends a sarcastic message. You read it and feel attacked. You think they meant something negative, but when you send a sarcastic message, you assume they know you're joking. You're sure your tone is clear. You give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You rarely give it to others. The same bias affects how we see effort. When you see someone else succeed, it's easy to think they had help, a head start, privilege. But your own path? That was harder. That took grit. That was different. You compare their highlight reel to your behind the scenes. You don't mean to. It just feels right. Now imagine two people applying for the same job. One gets the role and thinks, I deserved this. I'm qualified. The other doesn't get the role and thinks, they probably knew someone. Both could be right or wrong. But each believes their version fully. This mental habit doesn't stop at individuals. Whole groups can show it. Companies blame the market when profits drop, but take full credit when profits rise. Politicians blame the previous government when things go wrong and praise their own leadership when things go well. The self-serving bias doesn't belong to one kind of person. It's universal. But the scariest part? The more intelligent or successful someone is, the harder it is to notice. That's because they're better at rationalizing, better at explaining, better at defending their decisions. They don't lie, they just truly believe their version. They argue well, they sound logical, and they're convinced. This doesn't mean people are bad, it just means the mind wants a simple story, one where you're the hero, or at least not the villain. And once you start noticing this, you see it everywhere. You see it in the way people remember childhood. The good memories were about their choices. The bad ones were about other people, parents, teachers, friends, everyone but them. You see it in how people describe their breakups. They were too controlling. They didn't understand me. Rarely do people say, I wasn't mature enough, or I was the problem. Even in daily life, you'll spot it. You burn toast and say the toaster is old. You forget an appointment and say the calendar didn't sync. You bump into someone and say they weren't looking. You click send too soon and say the email app was lagging. But when someone else makes the same mistake, you wonder what's wrong with them. It's not just about ego, it's about identity. The self-serving bias isn't only protecting your pride, it's protecting your story, your version of who you are, and the brain will work hard to keep that story clean, unbroken, intact. But here's the twist. You're doing it, and so is everyone else, at the same time, in the same moment, which means while you're explaining your side, they're explaining theirs. Everyone's the hero, everyone's the victim. Everyone's just slightly above average, slightly more thoughtful, slightly more reasonable. But if everyone is, no one is. That quiet gap between what really happened and how we tell it, that's the self-serving bias at work. Not loud, not dramatic, just always there, helping you explain why things turned out the way they did, why you're right, why it wasn't your fault, and why next time things will go better because of you. You're walking through life with a quiet thought in the back of your mind. You know bad things happen. You see them on the news. You hear stories. A friend gets into a car accident. Someone your age gets sick. A neighbor loses their job. You understand these things are real. But deep down, you don't think they'll happen to you. This is optimism bias. You know that people lose money, that relationships fall apart, that businesses fail. But there's a part of your mind that believes you'll be the exception. You'll make it through. You'll beat the odds. You'll figure it out. This isn't something you've chosen to believe. It's something that lives in you quietly, shaping how you move through the world. It's not loud. It's not obvious. You don't walk around saying, nothing bad will ever happen to me. But when you hear about someone else's misfortune, you feel a small sense of distance, as if their story is happening on a different track, as if there's an invisible wall between their reality and yours. You wear a seatbelt, you lock your doors, you know how to be careful, but you also take small risks without thinking. You text quickly at a red light, you postpone a checkup for a few months. You assume that delay won't matter. That little voice says, you'll be fine. Optimism bias is your brain's way of protecting you from the weight of everything that could go wrong. If you fully understood how fragile life is, how quickly things can change, how little control you have over many parts of your story, it might become difficult to function. So the mind bends reality a bit. It shifts the numbers in your head. It softens the risks. It gives you just enough confidence to keep moving forward. This bias shows up everywhere. You believe your relationship will last, even though half of all marriages end in divorce. You start a business thinking yours won't fail, even though most do within 5 years. You assume your job is stable, even when layoffs are happening around you. You know the stats, you've read the stories, but your gut says, that's them, not me. It also affects how you view aging. You know people lose mobility. You know memory fades, but you assume you'll stay sharp. You'll be active. You'll be the one who beats the clock. You look at older people and think, I'll be different. This isn't arrogance. It's not even a conscious choice. It's a quiet, built-in optimism that's hard to shake. Sometimes optimism bias helps you. It gives you the courage to try new things, to take chances, to believe in yourself. If you knew exactly how hard something would be, you might never start. Optimism can act like a buffer. It protects your mind from being overwhelmed. It lets you move forward with less fear. It keeps you from freezing. But it can also lead to mistakes. You might not save enough money because you believe you'll earn more later. You might not get insurance because you assume you won't need it. You might ignore early warning signs in your body because you believe you're healthy. You might push off difficult conversations because you think things will fix themselves. You underestimate how long tasks will take. You overestimate your ability to cope. You ignore risk until it's too close to avoid. And when something finally does go wrong, it hits harder because you didn't see it coming. Think about how you plan a road trip. You map out the drive time. You imagine a smooth ride. You don't picture traffic, a flat tire, or a storm. If those things happen, they feel like bad luck, but they're not rare. They're common. You just didn't account for them. You believed the best case scenario. That's optimism bias in motion. It also affects how you view other people's choices. When someone makes a mistake, you see it clearly. You think, they should have known better. But when you're in the same situation, you assume you'll handle it differently. You assume you're more careful, more aware, more prepared. You believe you'll see the red flags. You'll know when to walk away. You'll know how to respond. But no one sees everything coming. People miss signs. They get tired. They want things to work out. They look away because they need a break. And sometimes they get blindsided. Optimism bias is not about believing life will always be easy. It's about underestimating how hard it can get. It's the space between knowing something is possible and believing it will happen to you. That space is where people make risky choices. They take on debt. They skip the fine print. They stay in situations longer than they should. They believe things will work out until they don't. You might notice this bias in small ways. You leave the house 5 minutes late and still expect to be on time. You eat poorly all week and assume one salad will balance it out. You think you can catch up on sleep over the weekend. You think the deadline isn't real until it is. These aren't big errors, but they come from the same place. The belief that you'll manage even if you don't prepare. You don't see yourself as reckless. You're just confident. That confidence might feel natural, but often it's built on stories that aren't true. Stories like, everything will work out, or I've handled worse, or that kind of thing doesn't happen to people like me. These thoughts are comforting, but they're not always real. And when life breaks that illusion, it can be hard to adjust. The first real loss, the first betrayal, the first health scare, the first time you realize things won't just fix them. So in those moments, optimism bias fades, and something else moves in, awareness. That awareness isn't panic, it's clarity. You start to notice risk. You make more deliberate choices. You ask more questions. You stop assuming you'll be fine, and you start preparing for what might happen. Not because you're afraid, but because you've seen enough to know better. Still, optimism bias doesn't vanish. It just hides. It waits for your guard to drop. It tells you the next situation will be easier, that the next person won't lie, that the next project will go smoothly. And maybe it will, but maybe it won't. This bias isn't a flaw. It's part of being human. It's your brain trying to protect you from the heavy weight of uncertainty. But the more aware you are of it, the more you can work around it. You can build safety nets. You can plan for setbacks. You can take steps, not just leaps. You won't always see the twist coming. You won't always be ready. But when you stop assuming you're the exception, you start making room for reality, not in a fearful way, in a calm, steady way. Because sometimes the best way to stay hopeful is to stop pretending you're invincible. You wake up, check your phone, and start scrolling. A friend just got a promotion. Someone else is on a beach in Bali. Another person hit their fitness goal and posted the perfect mirror photo. You stare at the screen. Something shifts inside you. You don't say it out loud, but the thought is there. Why am I not doing as well as they are? This is the social comparison trap. It's quiet, it's constant, and it's baked into how our minds work. You compare your life to someone else's and feel like you come up short. But what you're comparing yourself to isn't real. You're judging your entire life against someone else's best moment, captured in perfect lighting, cropped and filtered for effect. This trap doesn't need words. It works in silence. You see someone post about their new car. You remember your old one breaking down last week. You see their smiling face, their caption that says, feeling grateful, and you start to feel less grateful for what you have. You don't stop to ask what's behind the picture. You don't ask how many sleepless nights they had. You don't see the debt they might be hiding. You don't see the pressure, the anxiety, or the effort it took to even smile for that camera. You just see the moment. One perfect second, one frame out of thousands. Your mind doesn't care. It fills in the gaps. You build a full story from that photo. You assume they're happier, more successful, more fulfilled. You believe they have it figured out. You assume you're falling behind. You think you're late, even though no one is keeping time. That's how the trap gets you. Social comparison isn't new. People have always looked at their neighbors, coworkers, family members, but now you carry a pocket-sized window into hundreds of lives. Everyone seems to be doing something amazing, and that makes it easy to forget context. It makes it easy to think you're the only one struggling, that you're the only one unsure, anxious, tired, or trying to keep up. You start seeing yourself as the exception, not in a good way, in a way that makes you feel small. You compare your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. You see your messy kitchen, your arguments, your missed deadlines, your exhaustion. You see your life unfiltered. Then you scroll. You see people laughing, traveling, achieving. You start to wonder if something's wrong with you. You don't ask if the person in the photo cried themselves to sleep last night. You don't ask how many takes it took to get that perfect video. You don't ask what they're hiding. You just assume they're winning, and you're not. Comparison robs you of presence. You stop seeing what you have. You stop hearing your own thoughts. You start living on someone else's timeline. You think, I should be married by now. I should have a better job. I should look like that. I should feel happier. The word should is heavy. It doesn't come from your own voice. It comes from pressure you didn't ask for, from expectations you never agreed to, from standards no one really lives up to. The trap is subtle. You don't even notice it pulling you in. You tell yourself you're just catching up, just looking for inspiration, just checking in. But the more you scroll, the worse you feel. Your self-worth becomes elastic. It stretches and snaps depending on what you see. Someone posts good news, you feel bad. Someone posts bad news, you feel relieved. You don't want to feel that way, but you do, because comparison is not rational. It's emotional. It hits before thought, before logic. It shows up in your gut, in your chest, in that quiet voice that says you're not enough. You start to perform. You start to curate. You post things not because they matter, but because they look good. You filter your life to keep up, to be seen, to be approved of. You chase likes, views, comments. You look for signs that you're doing okay. You forget how to feel okay on your own. The trap becomes a loop. You compare. You feel bad. You post. You wait. You compare again. You never win because the bar keeps moving. Because the people you're comparing yourself to are also comparing themselves to someone else. Think about this. You see someone living your dream life, but someone else is looking at you the same way. They see what you have and think, if only I could be like them. You don't know it, but it's happening. You're someone's highlight reel, even if you don't feel like it, even if your life feels ordinary. Now imagine this. A person sitting in a dark room, they just had a fight with their partner. They feel like they've failed. They open their phone. They see your smile, your vacation, your new project. They sigh. They close the app. They think you're better off. They think they're behind. They fall into the same trap. The truth is, everyone is walking through something. Some people hide it better than others. Some are just better at smiling through pain, but no one escapes it. No one is free from doubt. No one's life is perfect. You don't need to stop looking. You just need to remember that what you're seeing isn't the whole story. It's one part, a small part, the part people choose to show. Everyone's hiding something. Everyone has moments they wouldn't post, nights they wouldn't share, thoughts they keep quiet. You're not alone in feeling less than. You're not broken. You're just caught in the comparison. There's no scoreboard, no timer, no race. You're not late. You're not failing. You're just living, and life looks different for everyone. So next time you catch yourself slipping into the trap, Pause. Ask yourself, do I have the full picture? Am I comparing fairly? Or am I judging my life based on someone else's best 5 seconds? That pause is power. That pause is where the trap breaks. You see something happen. Maybe a stock crashes, a couple breaks up, or a celebrity gets caught in a scandal, and your brain does something strange. It tells you, I knew that would happen. It feels true. It feels obvious. But did you really know? Or is your mind just playing a quiet trick? This is hindsight bias. It's when the outcome of an event suddenly seems predictable after it happens, even if there was no clear reason to expect it. It makes you feel like you saw the ending coming all along, even though you didn't have the script. Imagine you're watching a mystery movie. At the end, the detective reveals the killer. Suddenly, all the clues seem obvious. The weird glance in the hallway, the missing key, the broken alibi. Your brain quickly stitches the pieces together and makes it feel like the answer was clear from the beginning. But earlier, when you were watching it unfold, you didn't know. You had guesses, maybe, but you weren't sure. Now, you feel like it was obvious. That's hindsight bias working in the background. Think about a football game. Your team loses, and someone says, I knew they were going to blow it, but they didn't say anything before the loss. Or maybe you're the one thinking it. You recall missed passes and shaky plays, and now, with the final score in front of you, it all fits a narrative. It feels like the only outcome that made sense. That's hindsight bias again, giving you the illusion of foresight when all you really have is a finished story. This doesn't just happen in games or fiction. It happens in your life. You get a rejection email for a job you really wanted, and your mind tells you, I had a bad feeling about it. Even if you were hopeful before, your brain reshapes the past to match the present. That feeling you think you had, it might not have been there. Or maybe it was just one of many conflicting thoughts. But now it feels like the only one that mattered. It also shows up in relationships. When a breakup happens, people often say things like, I should have seen it coming, or I knew they weren't right for me. But if you rewind to a month earlier, you might have felt totally different. Happy, maybe, or unsure. The clarity only comes after the fact, when the outcome has colored everything that came before it. Your brain does this because it wants the world to make sense. It doesn't like randomness. It doesn't like not knowing. So when something happens, your mind takes the puzzle pieces and forces them into a shape that looks inevitable. It tells a story that fits, even if the pieces don't really go together that neatly. This is especially strong when emotions are involved. If something painful or surprising happens, your brain works extra hard to explain it. That explanation often includes rewriting your own thoughts and feelings from before the event. You think you were more sure than you were. You think the signs were clearer than they really were. And it happens quietly without you even noticing it. Think about the stock market. After a crash, people say, it was obvious: inflation, interest rates, geopolitical tension. But if you go back in time, there were people predicting the opposite. Some said the market would keep rising. Others had no idea what to expect. The signals were mixed. But after the drop, the narrative tightens. Suddenly, everyone knew it would happen. It happens in history too. Once an event occurs, it's easy to look back and say it was bound to happen. A war, a protest, a revolution. The steps leading to it feel clear. But before the event, people were unsure. They debated, they wondered. There were different possibilities. Hindsight bias removes that uncertainty. It simplifies the path. It makes the future feel like it was always one straight line, instead of a web of potential outcomes. Hindsight bias doesn't just change how you remember events, it changes how you judge others. If someone makes a decision that turns out badly, you might think, they should have seen that coming. You hold them to a standard that includes information they didn't have at the time. It feels like they ignored the obvious, when really, the outcome only seems obvious because it already happened. You might do this to yourself too. You look back at a choice and feel regret. I should have known better, you think, but maybe you couldn't have. Maybe you made the best decision you could with the information you had. But now, with the ending in plain view, your brain acts like it was always that clear. Hindsight bias also messes with your ability to learn from the past. If you think you knew something all along, you might not dig into why it really happened. You don't ask what signs you missed or what variables changed because you feel like there's nothing to learn. It was just obvious. But most of the time, it wasn't. Most of the time, the truth was tangled, uncertain, and only seems clear because of where you're standing now. Imagine a friend is telling you about their breakup. They list all the red flags. You nod, and maybe you think, yeah, I could tell that wouldn't last. But did you really think that before they told you? Or are you just stitching the story together after the fact? Now think about the choices you made a year ago. Pick one. Maybe a job change, or a move, or a relationship. Look at where it led. Does it feel like you knew what would happen? Did you expect things to turn out this way? Or are you adjusting the memory of your past thoughts to match what you now know? This is what hindsight bias does. It edits your memory without asking. It smooths the edges. It makes the past look neat and the future feel predictable, when really, both are messy. When you recognize it, you can start to question those automatic thoughts. Did I really know that? Was it really that obvious? What did I actually feel before it happened? These questions pull you out of the illusion. They remind you that clarity is easier to find after the ending. Hindsight bias can be subtle, but it shapes how you think about yourself, others, and the world. It gives you false confidence in your ability to predict. It makes you too sure, too soon. And it hides the complexity that existed before the outcome was known. It's not about blame, it's about understanding. Understanding that your memory is not a tape recorder, it's a story. And stories change when you know the ending. And now, as you think back on moments in your life that felt predictable in hindsight, ask yourself this: how many of them felt just as clear while you were living them? The answer might surprise you, or maybe you'll feel like you always knew. You think you've got it under control. You're sure your plan will work. You believe you understand the situation better than most people. You feel confident in your choices, your predictions, your timing. But there's a gap between what you know and what you think you know. That gap is where the overconfidence bias hides. You've seen it before, maybe in yourself, maybe in others. Someone takes a test and walks out smiling. They're certain they passed. Maybe they even expect a top score. Then the results come in and they're average. Not bad, but not what they expected. That's overconfidence. It sneaks in without warning. It feels like certainty, but it's not based on facts. It's based on a belief that you're more accurate, more skilled, more in control than you really are. Imagine you're driving a car. You've done it 1,000 times. You know the road, you know the route. You believe you're a better driver than most people. In fact, studies show that more than 80% of drivers think they're above average. That's mathematically impossible. Everyone can't be better than everyone else. But that's what overconfidence does. It makes you feel certain about things that can't all be true at once. The bias shows up in small ways. You might start a project thinking it will take you 2 days. It takes 5. You plan a vacation thinking you've packed everything, but when you arrive, you've forgotten something important. You invest in a stock because you're sure it's going to rise, but you didn't see the risks. Overconfidence doesn't feel like a mistake when it happens. It feels like control. It feels like certainty. Only later do the cracks show. Think about the last time you gave someone advice. Were you sure you were right? Did you consider that you might be wrong? Or did you speak with full confidence based on your own experience? The more you trust your intuition, the more you may lean into this bias. Confidence feels good. It calms anxiety. It simplifies decisions. But it can also block your ability to learn, because when you think you already know, you stop asking questions. This bias affects experts as much as beginners. A doctor who has seen thousands of patients might overlook a rare diagnosis because they're sure they've seen it all. A lawyer might miss a detail in a case because they think they know the pattern. The more experienced someone is, the easier it is for overconfidence to slip in quietly, disguised as certainty. And once it's there, it's hard to notice. Now picture someone making a prediction. Maybe it's a sports fan saying their team will win. Maybe it's a business owner forecasting next quarter's sales. Maybe it's you, thinking you can finish a task in less time than usual. That person doesn't just hope they're right, they feel certain. Their brain has filtered out the doubts, the unknowns, the risks, They've built a story in their mind, and it makes sense to them. It feels solid. But real life has more variables than that story includes. This bias isn't just about confidence, it's about miscalibration. That means your sense of accuracy doesn't match reality. You think your knowledge is complete, but it's missing key pieces. You think you can predict an outcome, but you haven't accounted for uncertainty. You think your decision is right, but you haven't tested it against enough possibilities. That misalignment leads to errors, small ones that waste time, and big ones that cause harm. Consider how this plays out in money. An investor sees a trend. They feel confident. They think they see the future. They invest heavily. But the market turns. Their confidence wasn't backed by full understanding. It was built on a feeling. Or take gambling. A person wins a few rounds. They feel lucky. They believe they're on a streak. They raise the stakes. Then they lose. Overconfidence leads them to risk more than they can afford, because they trust their gut more than the odds. In personal relationships, it shows up too. You might think you know how someone will respond to a situation. You act based on that belief, but they surprise you. Your confidence wasn't matched by insight, or you assume your communication is clear because it makes sense to you, but the other person hears something different. Overconfidence blocks you from checking in, from asking, from clarifying. It leads to misunderstanding. In school, students often misjudge how well they understand a topic. They review notes once and feel ready. But when the test comes, they struggle. The confidence wasn't matched by retention. It was a false signal. And in the workplace, employees might overestimate their productivity. They assume their output is enough without looking at the results. Managers might trust a strategy without testing it. The team moves forward, but the direction isn't right. Even in simple tasks, overconfidence appears. You assemble furniture without reading the manual. You cook a new recipe from memory instead of checking the ingredients. You try to fix something around the house, assuming you can figure it out. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But in each case, your belief in your ability wasn't based on proof. It was based on how confident you felt. The bias grows stronger when you succeed. Success reinforces the belief that you know what you're doing. It builds a pattern in your brain. That pattern tells you to trust yourself more next time. But each situation is different. What worked once won't always work again. Overconfidence makes you skip the step of evaluating. It tells you that checking your assumptions isn't necessary, that you've got this, that nothing will go wrong. Sometimes the bias can lead to real harm. In health, a person might ignore symptoms, convinced they're fine. They delay seeing a doctor. The condition worsens. In safety, someone might take a risk, thinking they'll be careful enough. But accidents happen in the space between confidence and reality. And in leadership, overconfident decisions can affect entire teams, companies, even countries. Leaders who believe they're always right stop listening. They stop adjusting. And they lead others into problems they didn't see coming. The tricky part is that this bias feels good, gives you certainty, it reduces anxiety, it gives you direction, but it's built on a false sense of clarity. When you're under its spell, you don't feel confused, you feel sure, you don't feel lost, you feel guided. But that's the trap, that's the mind game. It doesn't feel like a bias, it feels like confidence. And because of that, it's hard to catch. You can't remove overconfidence completely, but you can learn to slow down. Ask yourself questions. Look for gaps in what you know. Seek out feedback. Consider other views. Treat your certainty as a feeling, not as a fact. Let doubt be a tool, not a weakness. That way, your confidence becomes grounded, not in illusion, but in awareness. You've already put in so much. So you tell yourself you might as well keep going. You've spent hours on a movie that's boring, but you don't stop watching it. You've waited in a long line for food, and even when you're no longer hungry, you stay. You've poured years into a relationship that doesn't feel right, but the thought of leaving makes your chest tighten. That feeling is not logic. It's not duty. It's not commitment. It's the sunk cost fallacy. You think your past investment means you should keep investing, but the truth is, time, energy, money, attention, once it's spent, it's spent. The cost is sunk. It can't be returned. It can't be reclaimed. And your next move shouldn't depend on what you've already paid. It should depend on what you're getting from it now. and what it can give you next. Still, it doesn't feel that simple. You study for 5 years to become a lawyer. Halfway into your career, you realize you don't enjoy the work. You dread waking up in the morning. But you say to yourself, I can't throw away all those years. You already made the sacrifice. You already earned the degree. You already gave up your 20s. So you hold on. You keep showing up. You keep dragging yourself through it. Not because it brings you joy or growth, but because quitting feels like losing. The fallacy convinces you that stopping means failure. It whispers that turning around means admitting you were wrong. And we don't like to feel wrong. We don't like to feel wasteful. So we double down. We keep playing a losing hand, hoping somehow it'll turn into a win. Imagine you buy an expensive ticket to a concert. You feel sick that day. You'd rather stay home. But you tell yourself you have to go because you already spent the money. So you drag yourself out. You don't enjoy the show. You feel worse afterward. And the money? Still gone. You didn't get your value back. You just added more loss on top of it. You sacrificed your comfort, your time, your health, trying to salvage something that couldn't be saved. We do this all the time. You start reading a book. You're 150 pages in and it's just not clicking with you. You're not learning anything. You're not enjoying it. But you say, I've already made it this far. So you keep going. You keep flipping pages you won't remember. Instead of closing the book and picking one that might actually feed your mind, you sink deeper. We even see it in the workplace. A manager invests in a project that's not delivering. Months pass. Results are poor. But they've already put in a lot. Resources, meetings, late nights, hopes. Instead of shutting it down, they keep funding it. Because admitting it's a dead end feels worse than the loss itself. This isn't just stubbornness, it's a built-in bias. The brain is wired to avoid loss, especially emotional loss. And giving up on something you started often feels like a kind of death. The death of a plan, the death of a version of you, a version that once believed this path was right. But here's the truth. You're not wasting your past when you walk away from a mistake. You're saving your future. You're not disrespecting your effort when you redirect your energy. You're honoring it. The time, money, energy, they already taught you something. Even if the outcome wasn't what you hoped, even if it didn't last, even if it didn't work. There's value in learning that a thing doesn't fit. There's value in clarity, and there's power in cutting your losses before they grow bigger. The sunk cost fallacy is quiet. It doesn't shout. It disguises itself as loyalty, as discipline, as responsibility. But when you look closer, it's fear. Fear of regret, fear of embarrassment, fear of starting over. It makes you feel like the choice to continue is the brave one. But often, the braver move is stepping away. Think of all the things you could have ended sooner, all the jobs, all the plans, all the people, and think of where you might be if you had made the call earlier. If you had trusted that quitting sometimes is not failure, it's wisdom. No one likes to feel like they've wasted time, but wasting more time trying not to waste time, that's the real trap. You stay in a course you hate because you've already paid for it. You stay in a city that drains you because you signed a lease. You hold on to dreams that no longer fit who you are because they once did. But you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say, this isn't right anymore. You're allowed to cut the string and let go of the weight. You'll carry the lessons with you either way, whether you stay or whether you go. But only one of those paths is light enough to walk forward. So the next time you catch yourself saying, but I've already spent so much on this, ask instead, what will it cost me to keep going? And sit with that answer, because that's the only cost that matters now. You sit down with a to-do list and think, I can finish this in an hour. An hour passes and you're only halfway done. You blame distractions, maybe a slow start, maybe just today being off. But then it happens again and again. You estimate the time, you start with confidence, and the result is almost always the same. You're late, you're behind, or the project gets dragged out longer than you expected. This is the planning fallacy. It's the tendency to underestimate how long a task will take, even when you've done that task before. You might tell yourself you'll clean the kitchen in 20 minutes. You've cleaned the kitchen many times. It's never taken just 20 minutes. But still, that's the number you go with. That's the version of the future your brain offers you. And the moment you accept it, you've already set yourself up to fall behind. The problem isn't just wishful thinking, it's deeper than that. Your brain simplifies the future. It trims out delays. It removes the small bumps in the road, the moments when you get up for water, or check your phone, or reread what you wrote because it didn't sound quite right. Your mind creates an ideal version of the process, a clean timeline, a version of events without friction. It's the same when you pack for a trip. You might think it will take 30 minutes, but you forget that you'll change your shirt, second guess your choices, look for a charger that's not where it should be, then double check your passport, then triple check it. The actual process is full of these small moments that feel invisible when you think ahead, but they add up. And your prediction? It misses all of them. Even when you've done something many times before, you still fall for it. You might have written a paper in school dozens of times. Still, the next time you say, I can knock this out in 2 hours, you believe it. Even if last time it took 4. The past doesn't seem to stick. The present bias, the mind's habit of seeing the current version of you as more capable, overrides your memory. You trust that future you will move faster, focus better, get it right the first time. But future you is just you. The same distractions, the same delays, the same real-time experience of doing the thing. The same brain that will wander for a moment and take a little longer than planned. It's not about being lazy. The planning fallacy happens to everyone, even trained professionals. In construction, major projects almost always exceed their original timelines. Buildings take longer to finish. Bridges open later than scheduled. Budgets swell. Delays become expected. And yet, every time, the next plan still underestimates. Software developers deal with it constantly. A feature is estimated to take 1 week. That estimate is given by a senior engineer. The engineer has done similar features before. Still, it takes 3 weeks. Then it happens again. The estimates never seem to learn from reality. The same thing happens in writing, design, research, education. Anything that involves time and tasks, the brain will try to simplify what it sees ahead. Imagine you're moving to a new apartment. You plan for 1 day. Just one. You get the boxes. You think through the order. Start early, pack the car, drive over, unload, done by evening. But reality doesn't move in straight lines. A box breaks. You forget to eat. The elevator is slow. Someone helps, but they're late. The couch doesn't fit the stairs. That simple 1-day move becomes a 2-day process, sometimes more. And the version you pictured at the start was just a trimmed version of what would really happen. Even small things get caught in this trap. You say you'll reply to emails in 10 minutes, but you open one and it's longer than expected. You pause to think, maybe draft a careful reply, maybe search for a document. Now you're at 20 minutes, then 30. You planned too little. Again, it's not just poor judgment, it's a pattern of mental shortcutting. Your brain doesn't take into account all the small parts of a task when thinking ahead. It zooms out. It sees the whole picture, not the puzzle pieces. So your predictions are based on a high-level version of reality, not the detailed one you'll live through. One way people try to beat this is by adding buffer time. You say it'll take 30 minutes, so you schedule 45. But if your original estimate was wrong, adding 15 minutes doesn't fix much. You might still fall short, and then the cycle repeats. You end up feeling behind, even if you technically gave yourself extra time. Another issue is optimism. People believe they'll perform at their best, not average, not under pressure, but at their absolute best. No mistakes, no breaks, no problems. It's the best case scenario that becomes the plan. Anything less than that, and it feels like you failed. But really, the failure was in the expectation, not the outcome. And when deadlines are involved, the planning fallacy becomes a trap with consequences. You miss appointments, you turn in work late, you feel like you're always catching up, never ahead. And it's not because you didn't try hard, it's because you were set up with the wrong starting point, a faulty view of how much time you really needed. Sometimes you get frustrated with yourself. You wonder why you always do this. You think it's personal, like something's wrong with your discipline or motivation. But it's not personal, it's psychological. It's how the mind operates under uncertainty. And time, as an idea, is hard for the brain to map clearly. The brain is better at remembering the past than imagining the future. That's why the planning fallacy survives even after many failed estimates. You remember how long it took, but when you look forward, you still believe it'll be quicker next time. Memory and prediction don't fully connect, they sit in different drawers. You might try to avoid this by breaking down tasks more granularly. Instead of write the report, you list create outline, research key points, draft intro, and so on. That helps, a little. But even then, you'll likely underestimate each step. You don't account for the moment you get distracted by another idea, or when your energy dips, or when something unrelated comes up and takes your attention for 20 minutes. Even the idea of quickly checking something is wrapped in the planning fallacy. You open your messages just to reply to one. You think it'll take 1 minute, but then you see another message, then another, then you're scrolling. Then it's 15 minutes later, and you don't even remember what you originally meant to say. When you stack these small delays across an entire day, the effect compounds. That's why you look at the clock in the evening and wonder where the time went. It's not just distractions. It's not just poor time management. It's the constant underestimation built into every plan you made that day. There's also the issue of emotional bias. You want something to take less time because you want it done. You want to feel productive. You want to move on. That emotional desire compresses your mental timeline. You tell yourself the task is easy. You push the harder parts out of focus. You only see the finish line. But the finish line isn't what makes time pass. It's the steps, the waiting, the repetition, the boring middle parts. And those are the parts your mind edits out when you first make the plan. Even creative tasks get squeezed by this. You think writing a chapter will be smooth. You picture the idea flowing, but when you sit down, the words don't come. You revise, you pause, you question. That flow never arrives, or it comes in waves. And it takes longer than you thought, because the image in your head didn't match the texture of the real thing. And so it goes. A gap between prediction and reality. A soft kind of illusion. One that doesn't scream or hurt, but one that leaves you rushing, catching up, adjusting on the fly. And yet, the next time you estimate something, you'll probably still believe it'll be quick. It's not forgetfulness. It's the nature of the planning fallacy. You're sitting in traffic, you glance around. Other drivers are fumbling with their phones, braking too late, drifting between lanes. You think, I'm definitely a better driver than most of these people. It feels true. Maybe you're more cautious, more aware, more skilled. But here's the strange part. Most people think exactly the same thing. This is illusory superiority. It's the quiet belief that you're just a bit better than average. Not arrogant, not loud, just subtly, quietly better. At driving, at decision-making, at being a good friend, at understanding people. You might not even say it out loud, but inside it's there. It guides how you see yourself, and it shapes how you see others. There's something comforting about it. Thinking you're better than most. It creates a cushion for your ego, a little buffer between you and the possibility that you might be wrong or average or even below average at something. It doesn't mean you walk around thinking you're a genius, but it's that sense that when mistakes happen, they're usually someone else's fault. When things go well, it's because of your own good thinking. When things go badly, it's the situation, not you. This shows up in small ways every day. You might read a news article and think, most people won't understand the real implications of this, but I see the bigger picture. Or you might be in a group meeting, and while someone else is talking, you find yourself analyzing their logic, quietly feeling like your approach would be smarter, cleaner, more thought through. Even if you never say it, even if you're respectful, that feeling, that edge of I would have done it better, is the illusion doing its quiet work. Statistically, it can't be true. If everyone thinks they're better than average, someone has to be wrong. But the mind doesn't operate on math. It operates on perception. Your brain doesn't compare you to everyone. It compares you to a version of everyone it's created, built from what you see, what you assume, and what you remember. And memory is biased. You're more likely to remember other people's mistakes than their wins. You notice when someone cuts in line, but not when they wait patiently. You remember the bad drivers, not the safe ones. Your brain catalogs the worst and then uses that distorted sample to judge where you stand. It's not just driving or intelligence, it applies to kindness, humor, leadership, morality. In one study, most people rated themselves as more ethical than the average person. Not just more skilled, but more moral. They believed they cared more, tried harder, were more fair. But everyone can't be more ethical than everyone else. There's something else that makes this illusion powerful. It tends to survive even when we get clear feedback. Say you get a bad grade on a test, or you bomb a presentation. The illusion doesn't disappear. Instead, your mind finds reasons. The test was poorly written. The questions were unfair. The room was too hot. The audience was distracted. These aren't excuses in the classic sense. They're defense mechanisms. Your brain protects your self-image. It avoids the deeper, scarier thought. Maybe I wasn't prepared. Maybe I didn't perform well. That idea stings, so it wraps it up, muffles it, buries it under context. This isn't about being a narcissist, it's about being human. Illusory superiority is built into the mind's operating system. Most of the time, it helps you function. If you believed you were below average at everything, you'd be crushed. You might not take risks. You might not even get out of bed. The illusion gives you just enough confidence to keep going. But like any illusion, it comes with a cost. That cost shows up in missed growth. If you think you're already above average, why improve? If you think your judgment is usually right, why question it? The illusion becomes a ceiling. You don't see it, but it's there. You might resist feedback, avoid reflection, shrug off suggestions. Not because you're proud, just because you don't think they apply to you. You also misread others. If you believe you see more clearly than most, you might dismiss opinions that don't match yours. You might think someone else is overreacting or being naive, when in fact they're just coming from a different angle. You don't mean to invalidate them, but the illusion has already filtered your lens. It can even change how you remember the past. Let's say you had a disagreement with a friend. Later, when you replay the conversation in your mind, you might unconsciously edit the details. You soften your own words. You sharpen theirs. You remember yourself as calm, them as irrational. This version of the memory supports your self-view. It reinforces the idea that you were the reasonable one, the fair one, the better one. In school, this illusion can twist how students view their progress. A student might believe they understand the material, even if their grades say otherwise. They might think the teacher just grades unfairly or doesn't like them. That's easier than admitting, I didn't study enough, or I didn't really grasp the concepts. The illusion is comforting, but it blocks learning. At work, it can shape relationships. A manager might believe they're a good leader, fair, supportive, clear. But if the team feels confused or neglected, the illusion hides the gap. The manager may never notice. Or worse, they may assume the team is underperforming, rather than asking if their leadership needs adjustment. Even in love, the illusion lingers. One partner may believe they're the more understanding one, the one who always makes the effort. They may not see the quiet ways their partner is doing the same or more. Because they're so focused on their own intentions, their own efforts, they forget to see the full picture. And here's the part that really makes it stick. The more confident you feel in an area, the more likely the illusion is operating. If you believe you're a great communicator, you may not listen as deeply. If you think you're emotionally intelligent, you may overlook times when you were cold or dismissive. The illusion thrives where confidence goes unchecked, but it's not hopeless. Just being aware of it can loosen its grip. If you catch yourself thinking, I'm probably better at this than most, pause. Ask, what am I basing that on? Am I using real feedback, or am I comparing myself to a made-up version of average? You don't need to tear yourself down. You just need to see clearly. That clarity can be freeing. You start to notice other people's strengths. You start to see your own blind spots. You become more open to correction, to learning, to growth. And slowly, the illusion begins to fade. Not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece, like fog lifting from a quiet morning road. You walk into a store. You see a jacket hanging on the wall. The tag says it used to cost $400, but today it's marked down to $150. You don't really need a jacket. You weren't looking for one. But now it feels like a deal, a steal. Like if you walk away, you're losing something. That's anchoring. Your mind grabs the first number it sees, $400, and holds it. Everything that comes after is compared to that first number. In this case, $150 feels cheap. But if you had just seen the same jacket without a tag and someone told you it was $150, you might think it's overpriced. Same jacket, same price. But your brain reacts differently depending on the number you saw first. That's how anchoring works. It's not about logic. It's not about value. It's about the order in which information shows up. The first number, called the anchor, sticks to your thinking, even when it's completely arbitrary. You might think, I wouldn't fall for that. But it happens more than you realize. Every day. In ways you don't even notice. A real estate agent shows you a home priced at $0.2 million. It's a bit too expensive. Then they show you another one for $950,000. Now that second one seems more reasonable. But if they had shown you the $950,000 home first, your reaction might have been very different. The anchor, $1.2 million, changed your judgment. It didn't add information. It didn't change the house. It just shifted your frame. Anchoring bias doesn't only show up with prices. It can affect your estimate of someone's age, your guess about how long a project will take, or even your opinion on a new idea. You meet someone and hear that they're a high performer. Everything they say afterwards sounds smarter. You were anchored by the label. Or maybe someone tells you a film has a 92% rating. Suddenly, every scene feels better. You were expecting quality, so your brain filtered it in. There was a study where people spun a wheel with numbers on it. After spinning, they were asked to guess what percentage of African nations are in the United Nations. The wheel was rigged. Some got a low number like 10, others got a high number like 65. Those who spun low guessed low. Those who spun high guessed high. The wheel had nothing to do with Africa or the UN, but it set an anchor, and the anchor influenced their answers. They weren't even aware it was happening. Another study involved court cases. Two groups of experienced judges read the same case. Before giving a sentence, they rolled dice that were rigged to show either 3 or 9. Judges who rolled a 9 gave longer sentences than those who rolled a 3. Just a number. Just dice. And it changed how long someone would spend in prison. Even judges, trained, rational, experienced, fall for this. That's how powerful anchoring is. It doesn't matter if the number is random. It still grabs your mind and pulls. Sometimes you anchor yourself. Say you want to lose weight. You set a goal of losing 20 pounds. Now every pound lost is compared to that 20. 10 pounds might feel like failure, even if it's a real achievement. You anchored to a number you made up. It changes how you feel about progress. Or maybe you start a project and tell yourself you'll finish in 2 weeks. Even if things change, even if it becomes more complex, that 2-week mark lingers. You feel behind. You feel pressure because you anchored and you didn't adjust. In negotiations, anchoring is everywhere. The first person to name a price usually has the advantage. That number becomes the starting point. Even if it's unreasonable, the rest of the conversation revolves around it. A salary offer of $90,000 feels different when you expected $70,000 than when you were hoping for $120,000. Your reaction isn't just about the money. It's about what came first. Retail stores know this. That's why they put original price tags on everything. Why they offer limited time discounts from made-up highs. They're not just selling you the product, they're selling you a number to compare it to. And it's not just companies, it's people too. Someone tells you their last job paid them a certain amount. That number sets a tone for what they expect from you, even if that job had nothing to do with the one you're offering. Even if it was in a different country, the number stays in your head. It won't leave easily. Anchoring can even affect your own self-worth. If you've been told you're average your whole life, your anchor is low, so even small wins feel big. But if you've always been told you're gifted, you might see a decent performance as a failure. The anchor shapes your story. You compare everything to it, sometimes without realizing. One of the trickiest parts of anchoring is that you can't turn it off. You can try to fight it, but the effect is sticky. Once a number is in your head, it stays. The best you can do is recognize it. See when it's happening. Ask yourself, is this number relevant, or is it just the first thing I saw? The answer won't always fix the bias, but it gives you a better chance. Imagine you're buying a car. The salesperson tells you the model is usually $30,000. Today, they can offer it for $24,000. That sounds good. But maybe that $30,000 was never real. It's just a number placed in your mind to shift your expectations. If you'd walked in and they said the car costs $24,000 with no context, you might ask for a discount. But now you feel like you're getting a deal. You're anchored. Even something as simple as seeing was $5.99, now $3.49 on a snack works. The $5.99 means nothing to you. You don't know if that's the normal price or an inflated one, but it changes your feeling about the 3.49 cents. It makes it feel better. That's anchoring in its most basic form. This happens with time too. You think you'll finish something in an hour. Then 2 hours in, you feel behind, even if the task really takes 2 or 3 hours. That first number changes your sense of pacing, your mood, your energy. You didn't fail. You just anchored to a bad estimate. It happens with effort. Someone tells you learning a language takes 6 months. You start learning. You hit month 4 and feel like you're not progressing fast enough. But maybe 6 months was a guess. Maybe it doesn't apply to you. Still, that number sticks, and it changes how you judge yourself. Anchoring also affects how we think about others. You hear that someone donated $1 million to charity. Now, when you hear someone else donated $10,000, it feels small. But $10,000 is a lot. The anchor changed your sense of scale. You can even anchor emotionally. You remember someone treating you poorly. That memory becomes the baseline. Now, when someone treats you decently, it feels amazing. Not because it is, just because it's better than what came before. Your emotional expectations were anchored low. It goes the other way, too. You start a relationship that feels perfect at first. Everything after is compared to those first few weeks. Even if things are still good, they don't feel the same, because your anchor was set at an impossible high, and now you measure against it without meaning to. Anchoring is subtle. It slides into your thinking. It changes the value you assign to things, the way you measure progress, the choices you make. It sets the tone before the story even starts. And once it's there, it doesn't go away on its own. You hear 2 doctors say the same thing. One says, "This procedure has a 90% success rate." The other says, "This procedure has a 10% failure rate." Which one would you feel safer choosing? Most people go with the first, even though both say the exact same thing. That's the framing effect. It's how the way something is presented changes how you feel about it, and it can change what you do, how you vote, what you buy, and what you fear. Even when the facts don't change at all. Let's take another simple case. A pack of ground beef in the store is labeled 80% lean. That feels good. It sounds healthy, but the same pack, labeled 20% fat, makes people hesitate. Less people buy it. Same meat. Same numbers, just flipped around. Your brain processes those 2 messages in different emotional ways. Lean is a positive word. Fat is negative. So even if the math is identical, the emotional reaction is not. And when emotions change, decisions change too. You probably see this in politics all the time. A tax cut is called relief when it's for the middle class. But when it's for the rich, opponents call it a loophole. Same policy. 2 different frames. One invites support, the other invites outrage. The same happens in medical research. Let's say a new drug is tested on 100 people. 5 people have a bad reaction. A doctor might tell you, this drug works for 95 out of 100 people. You feel confident. But if the same doctor said 1 out of 20 people suffer side effects, you might suddenly think twice. Nothing changed about the results, just the way you were told. This effect doesn't need big decisions to work. Even tiny shifts in wording change how we behave. A door sign that says, "Don't forget to turn off the lights," gets less response than one that says, "Turning off lights saves energy." The first is a command. The second is a value. The first puts pressure on you. The second invites purpose. When you frame a message, you're setting the stage for how the listener will think. It's like tilting the floor under their feet, so they walk in a certain direction without noticing. The ground feels flat, but it isn't. Marketers use this all the time. A price of $19.99 sounds way cheaper than $20. Even though the difference is just 1 cent, our brains round it down. We feel like we're getting a better deal. We're not. but it feels that way, and that's what drives the decision. Framing doesn't just affect logic, it affects memory too. If someone tells you, that guy is always angry, you'll see his face in a different light the next time you meet him. If someone says, he's intense because he cares, the same behaviors might come across as passionate. Same person, same tone. But now your expectations shape what you see. In courtrooms, lawyers choose frames to persuade. If a witness is calm and collected, the jury may find them credible. But if the other lawyer says they're rehearsed and robotic, suddenly the same behavior looks suspicious. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. The framing effect is powerful because it operates below awareness. You don't stop to question the frame. You absorb it along with the message. Like water in a glass, you notice the water, not the shape of the glass. Even statistics, which feel objective, are vulnerable. If a news anchor says crime is up 10% since last year, you feel alarmed. But if they say crime is still 90% lower than a decade ago, you feel relieved. Both might be true, but the frame you hear decides what sticks. In your own life, framing shows up in how you talk to yourself. When you fail, do you call it a mistake or a lesson? Do you say, I'm not good at this, or I'm still learning? Your words become the lens through which you view your own effort. That lens shapes how you keep going or give up. Sometimes we even frame other people's intentions in ways that change relationships. A late reply might be seen as, they don't care, or they must be busy. Same silence. But one frame breeds resentment. The other gives grace. Framing can also distort fairness. Suppose a company lays off workers and tells them, we had to reduce costs to survive. It feels harsh, but understandable. If instead they say, we're optimizing our workforce for efficiency, it sounds colder, more distant, like people are pieces on a chessboard. The trick of the framing effect is not that it lies to you. It simply nudges your focus. It tells you what to look at. And just like in a photograph, what's left out of the frame can be just as important as what's inside it. You can't escape framing, but you can become more aware of it. When you feel a strong reaction to something, a headline, a sentence, a statement, stop and ask, what frame am I being handed here? What's the other way to look at this? Think about how often we frame time. You might say you only have 2 days left before a deadline. That creates pressure. But if you say, I still have 2 days to finish, you might feel capable. One of the most subtle uses of framing is in questions. Ask someone, why do you think you failed? And you force them to justify their weakness. Ask instead, what got in your way? And you open space to reflect on conditions, not character. Even our identities are framed through words. Are you an aspiring writer, or are you someone who hasn't published yet? Are you unemployed or between jobs? One suggests movement. The other suggests being stuck. The mind responds not just to truth, but to how that truth is shaped. The framing effect is the art of shaping that truth, not by changing facts, but by changing the window you're looking through. So next time you hear something that sounds persuasive, look at the window, not just the view. You walk into a classroom. You've studied the night before. You feel a bit unsure, but the teacher catches your eye. She gives a small nod, like she believes you'll do well. You sit down and begin. Something shifts. You try a little harder. You double-check your answers. You even take your time on the last question. Later, you find out you scored higher than you expected. Not because you studied harder than usual, not because the test was easier, but because you thought someone believed in you. This is what psychologists call the Pygmalion effect. It's a quiet force, one that nudges your behavior without you noticing. When someone expects you to do well, you tend to rise to that expectation. Not through pressure, not through fear, but through a subtle shift in how you see yourself. Their belief becomes a kind of mirror. You start acting in a way that reflects their belief, even if you didn't feel that confidence to begin with. This doesn't just happen in school. Picture a manager in an office. 2 employees start on the same day. One is treated like a top performer from day one. The manager assigns them important tasks, asks for their input during meetings, trusts them to figure things out. The other employee is seen as someone who needs hand-holding. They're given smaller tasks, they're told exactly what to do. Over time, the first employee starts outperforming the second. The gap wasn't there on day one. It grew from expectations, not ability. The Pygmalion effect works in quiet ways. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it whispers, it gives small cues: eye contact, tone of voice, subtle trust. These cues tell you how others see you, and strangely, you start to agree with them. You adjust your behavior without realizing it. You lean into the version of yourself they expect. Even body language plays a role. A coach who expects an athlete to improve will give more feedback. Their face will show more interest. They'll stand closer, speak more clearly, and follow up more often. The athlete picks up on this, even if the coach never says it out loud. The result? Better performance. But it started with belief. It's not magic, it's feedback loops. You get more attention, more opportunities, more encouragement. You take more risks, you work harder because you believe there's a reason to. Success comes from that added effort, and it reinforces the belief on both sides. The coach thinks, I was right. The athlete thinks, I can do this. And the loop continues. But this works in reverse too. That's where things get uncomfortable. If someone expects you to fail, they may not say it, but they might not give you a chance. They might skip your name during discussions. They might offer less support, fewer opportunities to show what you know. You pick up on those signals. You shrink, you stop offering ideas, you hesitate, and then you fall short. They think, see, I was right. You think, maybe I'm just not good at this. The loop turns toxic. This is why small signals matter. The way a teacher calls on students, the tone a parent uses when asking about school, the type of task a boss assigns, it's all information. It tells people how much you believe in them. And once that belief is out there, it doesn't just sit quietly. It pushes things forward. Or it holds them back. In one study, teachers were told that certain students were expected to show high growth during the year. These students were chosen at random. There was no real reason to expect better performance. But something interesting happened. The students actually did improve, not because they suddenly got smarter, not because they tried harder on their own, but because the teachers treated them differently. They smiled more. They asked more follow-up questions. They showed more patience. The students picked up on those signs, and they responded. This isn't about pretending everyone is perfect. It's not about ignoring real differences in ability or experience. It's about noticing how your expectations shape your behavior, and how your behavior shapes someone else's performance, even when you don't mean it to. Think about moments when someone believed in you, not with a speech, not with praise, but with presence. They looked at you like you were already capable. They trusted you with something slightly beyond your comfort zone. You probably rose to the occasion. Not because you were sure of yourself, but because they seemed sure. That kind of belief doesn't need big words. It just needs consistency. We carry those beliefs with us. A parent who shows trust early on builds a child's sense of self. That child becomes an adult who tries harder, takes more initiative, solves problems instead of avoiding them. A student who is treated as smart becomes someone who learns more easily, not because their brain changed, but because they stopped doubting it. They started leaning in, not leaning away. The tricky part is that the Pygmalion effect is hard to see while it's happening. You often realize it only in hindsight. Maybe you look back at a boss who trusted you more than you thought you deserved, or a coach who corrected you, but never gave up on you. At the time, you thought you were just pushing through, but their quiet belief was giving you more than you knew, a kind of permission to grow. Sometimes people say, I just needed someone to believe in me. That's not a cliche. That's the Pygmalion effect in one sentence. It's not about motivation posters or pep talks. It's about real human interaction. It's about attention, tone, and expectation, and how those simple things can change the way you move through the world. You don't need a crowd to feel it. One person is enough. One person treating you like your ideas matter, like your potential is already part of you, not something far away. That one person can change the way you speak up, the way you plan, the way you work. You may not even remember the first time someone saw something in you, but your behavior remembers. It remembers who gave you space, who gave you time, who asked you the harder question because they thought you could answer it. That memory shows up again later, in job interviews, in relationships, in choices you make when no one is watching. The Pygmalion effect isn't about flattery. It's about expectation made real. Expectations shape perception. Perception shapes behavior, and behavior creates outcomes. It starts quietly and it moves slowly, but it moves everything. You can feel it in a room. You can feel when someone sees you as competent, even if you're still learning. You sit up straighter. You explain your thoughts more clearly. You try just a bit more. Not to impress, but because something inside wants to meet the image they're reflecting back at you. And once that shift happens, it's hard to unsee. You begin to expect more of yourself. Not in a heavy way, not in a rushed way, but with a kind of steadiness, a calm drive. Because if someone else believed it, maybe it's not so far off. And if that belief was misplaced, if they saw something in you that wasn't quite there yet, that's okay, because now it's growing. You meet someone for the first time. Maybe they speak well, have good posture, or seem confident. Without even thinking about it, your brain fills in the blanks. You assume they're smart, capable, maybe even kind or trustworthy. You've never seen them in a crisis, never watched them solve a tough problem, never worked with them under pressure. Still, you think they'd handle it all well. That's the halo effect, and it happens to you more than you realize. The halo effect is a mental shortcut. Instead of analyzing each trait of a person or thing one by one, your brain takes one standout quality and lets it color everything else. That single good impression acts like a filter. It doesn't just tint the rest of what you see, it distorts it. Think of it like smudging a thumbprint across a camera lens. Everything that comes after is blurred through that first impression. Imagine you're at a job interview. The candidate arrives on time, dresses well, and speaks confidently. Just based on those early signals, you start assuming things. You assume they're competent, hardworking, maybe even more intelligent than others. But what if they're not? What if they're just good at interviews? The halo effect leads you to connect dots that don't exist. Now think about school. A student who speaks clearly in class and turns in homework on time is often labeled as bright or gifted. Teachers may expect more from them. They may excuse the student's mistakes more easily. The same mistake from another student might be seen as a flaw. For the favored student, the positive traits they've shown create a kind of mental halo. It shields them from criticism and inflates how others see their abilities. This isn't limited to people. It happens with products too. Take smartphones, for example. A company known for sleek designs and smooth user experience releases a new phone. Even before you test it, you assume it's good. You expect the camera to be sharp, the battery to last long, and the software to run smoothly. Maybe it doesn't, but that first impression, built from earlier products, forms a halo. It protects this one from being judged fairly. In relationships, the halo effect can cloud judgment for years. Someone falls for a partner who's funny and charming. These early traits create a strong impression. Later, when problems arise, poor communication, irresponsibility, dishonesty, they're often overlooked or excused. They're just stressed, you might say, or they're usually so kind. That's the halo talking. You aren't seeing the person clearly anymore. You're seeing them through the glow of who they were in your mind at the start. Celebrities deal with the halo effect all the time. When a famous actor speaks on science, politics, or social issues, people often listen with trust, not because of their expertise, but because they're likable or admired in a completely different field. Their talent in one area bleeds into our perception of their credibility everywhere else. But being good at acting doesn't mean you understand economics. Being a star athlete doesn't mean your opinion on medicine is valid. The halo effect stretches praise where it doesn't belong. This mental bias even plays out in courtrooms. Studies have shown that attractive defendants are more likely to receive lighter sentences than less attractive ones. Why? Because jurors assume, even unconsciously, that someone who looks good must also be good, that their intentions are better, that they're more honest. Their appearance builds a narrative, even when the facts don't support it. Let's slow it down. You're watching a presentation. The speaker is polished, their slides look clean, their voice is smooth. Everything looks right, but their points don't quite make sense. The logic is shaky. You feel like something's off, but you doubt yourself. Maybe you just missed something. Maybe they're right, and you're not seeing it. That hesitation comes from the halo effect. Their confidence and presentation created the illusion of competence. Your brain connected those dots automatically. It's not that you're foolish, it's that your brain wants to be efficient. It doesn't like uncertainty, and it prefers simple answers. So when one positive trait stands out, it's easier to just assume the rest will follow. This saves mental effort, but it creates blind spots. Now consider the workplace. Managers are especially prone to this. An employee who speaks well in meetings, sends prompt emails, and seems eager may get more trust. They're seen as reliable, maybe even leadership material. Meanwhile, another employee who's quiet, awkward, or slow to speak might be overlooked, even if their work is excellent. The halo effect creates imbalance. It rewards surface traits and overlooks deeper qualities. You see this in marketing too. A brand that once impressed you tends to stay in your good books. If they release a bad product, you might give it more chances. You assume it must be a one-time fluke. But if a brand you don't trust releases something great, you hesitate. You assume it won't last. That kind of loyalty or resistance isn't always earned. It's carried over from that first impression, long ago. Even in parenting, it shows up. A child labeled as the responsible one may be trusted more, even when they mess up. Their behavior is explained away. A child labeled as the troublemaker might get punished faster, even if their mistake was smaller. Once a halo is formed, or its opposite, the horn effect, every action gets judged through that lens. The halo effect doesn't just live in others' minds, it lives in yours. You do this to people all the time. You meet someone, and within minutes, you've created a full picture. If that first impression is good, it's hard to change your mind later, even when the evidence says you should. You excuse the bad behavior. You overlook the weak spots. You rewrite the story to keep the illusion going. This bias has roots in evolution. Judging quickly kept us alive. If someone looked healthy, confident, or dominant, it made sense to trust or follow them. But now, in a world full of complex roles and blurred lines, those snap judgments can mislead us. They can make us loyal to the wrong people, ignore warning signs, and miss out on those who don't shine at first glance. The most subtle part? You rarely know when it's happening. The halo effect doesn't announce itself. It just settles in quietly. It makes you think you're being objective when really, your mind is leaning heavily on that first feeling. That glow you felt when someone spoke, smiled, or impressed you in a specific way, it stretches far beyond where it belongs. You can't turn it off, but you can pause. You can slow down and question the picture your brain paints. You can ask, am I judging this person on what they did or how they made me feel the first time we met? Because not every halo is holy. Some are just reflections of your own hope. You see someone struggling. Maybe they lost their job, maybe their partner left them, maybe they're homeless. And without thinking too hard about it, your brain quietly whispers, they must have done something to deserve this. This isn't cruelty. Not on the surface. It's something deeper, quieter, a hidden belief system running in the background. It's called the just world hypothesis. It's the idea that the world is fair, that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. It's comforting. If the world is fair, then good people will be rewarded and bad people will be punished. You don't have to worry about random misfortune. You don't have to accept chaos. You just have to behave, do the right things, and everything will work out. But life doesn't always work like that, and this belief that the world is fair can quietly twist the way you see others. Picture this. You're scrolling through social media, and someone posts a story about getting scammed out of their savings. You pause for a moment. Maybe you feel bad, but then your mind starts to search. Did they fall for something obvious? Did they ignore red flags? You begin to find small reasons why you wouldn't have let that happen. You wouldn't have clicked that link. You would have double-checked the email. You would have known better. It starts to feel less like bad luck and more like their fault. This isn't because you're heartless. It's because your brain is protecting you. It wants to keep believing that misfortune only comes to those who deserve it. That way, if you keep doing the right things, you'll stay safe. It feels like logic, but it isn't. It's a bias. It's a mind game. The just world hypothesis doesn't just shape how you think about strangers. It creeps into the way you view friends, family, and even yourself. Imagine hearing that someone's partner cheated on them. You might say, "That's terrible," but part of you might wonder if they were neglectful, if they weren't affectionate, if they did something to push the other person away. You search for a reason because randomness is hard to accept. If cheating can happen without a cause, then maybe it could happen to anyone, maybe even you. And that's the part your mind doesn't want to face. Here's another scenario. A woman walks home at night and gets attacked. The news reports it. You feel shocked, sad. But later, in quiet conversation, someone says she shouldn't have been walking alone. And maybe, without thinking, you nod. It sounds practical, like common sense. But underneath, it's not just advice, it's a form of blame. It says this wouldn't have happened if she had done things differently. It places the fault, not with the attacker, but with the victim. It reinforces the illusion of control. If you don't walk alone, you'll be fine. You're not like her. You're safe. This bias shows up in courtrooms too. Jurors sometimes give harsher sentences if they believe the victim was innocent, and lighter ones if the victim had any perceived flaws. They don't do this consciously. They aren't thinking about the just world hypothesis, but it guides their judgment. It makes them feel like justice has been done, even if it hasn't. People use it on themselves as well. Someone gets sick and wonders if they did something wrong. Maybe they blame their diet, or their stress, or their mindset. They try to find a cause, not because it's there, but because the idea that bad things just happen feels unbearable. If they can find a reason, they can fix it. Or at least, they can feel like they could have fixed it. The irony is that the just world hypothesis can actually make people less compassionate. Instead of helping others, they might pull away. If you believe someone's pain is their own fault, you're less likely to offer support. You might feel like helping them interferes with the natural order, like you're rewarding failure. This happens in politics, in welfare debates, in conversations about poverty and crime. People start to think they must not be trying hard enough, or they made their choices. It sounds rational, but it's often based on a false belief that life always gives people exactly what they earn. Think about it like this. If you see someone driving recklessly and they crash, it's easy to say they had it coming. But what if they were driving carefully and someone else hit them? What if they did everything right and still got hurt? That's harder to process. It doesn't feel fair, and your brain doesn't like unfair. So sometimes it rewrites the story. It adds missing details. Maybe they weren't paying attention. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they could have done something different. Anything to make it feel earned. This isn't just an individual problem. Whole cultures can be shaped by the just world hypothesis. You see it in stories, in religions, in politics. What goes around comes around. They got their karma. You reap what you sow. These ideas aren't always wrong, but when they become the only lens you see through, they distort reality. Even small children show signs of this belief. In studies, they're more likely to give nice toys to good puppets and take away toys from bad ones, even if the bad ones haven't done anything seriously wrong. They're trying to match behavior to outcome, to create a world where good is rewarded and bad is punished. It's a story that makes sense, but the real world doesn't always follow that script. When you believe the world is fair, you don't prepare for unfairness. You might judge people who go through things you've never experienced. You might think, that would never happen to me, when really, you've just been lucky so far. The just world hypothesis makes you feel safer, but it can also make you colder, less curious, less open, less able to understand someone else's pain. You might think you're being logical, when really, you're protecting a belief. The belief that good things happen to good people, that if you do your part, nothing will go wrong. But deep down, you probably know that's not always true. You've seen people suffer for no reason. You've seen kind people get sick, talented people fail, hardworking people get passed over, and still the mind wants a reason, because reason feels safer than randomness. This bias doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Everyone has it to some degree. The trick is noticing when it kicks in. When you feel yourself starting to explain someone else's pain, stop. Ask yourself if you're looking for comfort or for truth, because sometimes the truth is this. Life isn't always fair. People don't always get what they deserve, and that's not a flaw in your thinking. That's just the way things are. You see an item marked Only two left in stock. Your attention sharpens. You weren't even sure you wanted it before. But now you're considering it seriously. The thought creeps in. What if I miss out? That quiet shift in urgency, that nudge toward desire, it's the scarcity illusion. A psychological bias where something feels more valuable, not because of what it is, but because there seems to be less of it. You're not reacting to the product. You're reacting to its availability. This happens all the time, not just online. Imagine a group at a party. Everyone seems to want to talk to one specific person. They're not necessarily funnier, kinder, or more interesting. But because they're surrounded by attention, they start to feel exclusive, scarce. You watch from a distance and assume there must be a reason why others are drawn to them. Maybe they're important. Maybe you've missed something. In truth, the attention itself created the illusion of value. Scarcity tricks the brain. It puts your mind in a defensive posture. It whispers, "This might go away." So you lean forward. You start to make mental space for it in your life. You create a sense of personal urgency, one that didn't exist until you believed it might be taken from you. Take concert tickets. You may not be a fan of the artist, but when you hear the show is almost sold out, it suddenly becomes more appealing. Your decision-making changes. You weigh fewer options. You imagine yourself in the crowd, part of something rare. In reality, nothing has changed about the concert itself, only the number of seats available. But now it feels like you need to be there. Airlines use this constantly. Hotel sites, too. Only one room left at this price. You weren't in a rush to book, but the second that red banner flashes across your screen, your brain tightens. What was once a flexible plan becomes a pressured decision. Scarcity turns planning into reacting. Sometimes this illusion affects how we see people. A friend who becomes distant, who texts less, starts to feel more interesting. You wonder what made them pull away. You imagine they're busy with something better. You might even start valuing them more, just because their attention is no longer guaranteed. Scarcity isn't just about objects or money. It's about attention, presence, time. In relationships, this becomes a game of availability. People who appear less interested can often be perceived as more desirable. This isn't always conscious, but emotional scarcity, the sense that someone is not fully accessible, activates pursuit behavior. You begin filling in blanks. Maybe they're mysterious. Maybe they have a lot going on. You project value into the space they've left empty. The strange thing is, once something scarce becomes easily available, its perceived value drops. That's the core of the illusion. We don't want what's rare because of its quality. We want it because we fear losing it. Remove the scarcity, and the fear disappears. What's left might not have been that special in the first place. Luxury brands play this game well. They limit supply, not because they can't make more, but because controlled scarcity builds desire. A limited edition shoe, a numbered print, a designer bag with a wait list. The product is important, yes, but the feeling that you might not be able to have it is what fuels the want. You're not just buying the thing, you're buying your escape from missing out. Think about how you react to time-limited offers. Today only. Flash sale. These aren't designed to help you save money. They're designed to shrink your decision window. The shorter the time, the less likely you are to reflect. Scarcity speeds up the process. When time is short, people don't ask, "Do I want this?" They ask, "Will I regret not getting this?" Even in friendships, the illusion can show up. The friend who's always around, always available, can sometimes be taken for granted. Not because they're less valuable, but because they aren't scarce. Familiarity doesn't trigger urgency. On the flip side, someone who pops in and out of your life irregularly can seem more intriguing. Not because they bring more, but because their presence feels limited. This plays out in social media too. Posts with low availability, like disappearing stories or temporary content, often get more engagement. You might skip a permanent post, but you'll click a story because it'll be gone soon. Same content, same creator, different perceived urgency. Scarcity has shaped how platforms are designed and how users respond. Your brain evolved to notice scarcity because, in the past, it often meant survival. Limited food, limited shelter, limited mates. Scarcity mattered. But today, it shows up in places that don't threaten your survival, only your attention. Still, your mind reacts the same. You notice the limit, not the value. The only one left lights up a part of your brain that says, I can't risk missing this. But that part isn't evaluating quality. It's only reacting to availability. When you walk past a restaurant with a long line, it catches your eye. Not because you know it's good, but because others are waiting. The line itself becomes a signal. You start to think, it must be worth the wait. You haven't looked at the menu. You don't know the prices. You're responding to demand. That demand creates scarcity, and the scarcity implies value. Even ideas can be affected. If someone tells you this book is hard to find, you might think it must be special. If a movie gets pulled from streaming services, people suddenly want to see it more. If a product is banned or recalled, interest often goes up. Scarcity adds an aura of importance, even when the thing itself hasn't changed. Think of trends: limited time colors, exclusive drops, short-lived collaborations. These aren't always about design, they're about access. When something is only available for a short time, it creates a rush. Not everyone wants it because of what it is. They want it because not everyone can have it. It's easy to believe that you're making rational decisions in these moments, that you've weighed the pros and cons, but most of the time, your brain skips that part. It sees a disappearing option and acts. That's the illusion at work. The scarcity becomes the reason, not the product. You may not even like the thing that much once you get it, but by then, you've already justified the choice. You might not remember the last time you bought something just because it was limited, but it happens more often than you think. That final sale email, that exclusive invite, that one-time offer. These tactics don't force you to buy. They guide you to value something differently, quietly, persuasively, in the background of your thoughts. Even when scarcity is artificial, it works. A product might be in full supply, but if the website shows low stock, your brain doesn't question it. It responds. It doesn't ask, is this worth it? It asks, can I afford to wait? That's the trap. The illusion doesn't need to be real. It just needs to feel real. Once it does, your brain does the rest. And that's how scarcity shapes your choices, quietly, every single day. You find an old mug in the back of your cupboard. It's chipped. The design is faded. You haven't used it in years. But when someone asks if they can take it off your hands, something strange happens. You hesitate. Even though you forgot it existed, you now feel like it has value. Not because it's rare or useful, but because it's yours. This is the endowment effect. It's the tendency to believe something is worth more simply because you own it. It doesn't matter if the item is basic, outdated, or even broken. Once it becomes part of your world, your mind assigns it extra weight. You may not notice it, but this effect runs quietly in the background of your decisions every day. Imagine you're at a market. You see a small bowl for sale. It's plain, nothing special. The seller tells you it's $5. You think for a second and walk away. Later that week, you're cleaning and find the same bowl in your kitchen. You've had it for a while. If someone offered you $5 for it now, you'd likely say no. Why? It's the same bowl. Same size, same shape, same function. But now, it's your bowl. That small detail, ownership, has shifted how your mind sees its value. This effect isn't just about things. It shows up in how we treat our ideas, our routines, and even our relationships. If you've ever defended a belief harder than it deserved, it might be because you felt like it belonged to you. You developed it, lived with it, trusted it. Letting it go feels like losing something personal, not just logical. So you hold on tighter, even when you suspect it may be wrong. The endowment effect has been studied for decades. Researchers have run many experiments, but one of the most famous involved mugs. In one version of the study, people were given a simple coffee mug. They held it, looked at it, maybe even imagined using it. Then the researchers asked them how much money they would accept to give the mug up. Most people wanted at least $5 or $6, but when a different group, people who never got a mug, were asked how much they'd pay to buy one, their answers were lower, often just $2 or $3. Same mug, same setting. The only difference was ownership. It's not that the people with the mug were greedy. It's that ownership creates attachment. That attachment shifts perception. The mug feels like it has more value now that it's mine. And this happens fast. You don't need years of use or sentimental memories. Sometimes all it takes is a few minutes for your mind to flip the switch. Now, think about your closet. How many clothes sit in there untouched for months? maybe years. You could donate them, you could sell them, but you don't. You feel like they're worth something, and maybe they are, but often they're not worth what you think. If you saw the same shirt at a thrift store, would you pay $5 for it? 10? Probably not. But when it's your shirt, the one you bought, wore once, maybe meant to wear again, you feel its value differently. The endowment effect also explains why people sometimes stay in homes they no longer love. Maybe the location is bad, the rooms are small, the plumbing is old, but it's yours. You've painted the walls, you've planted flowers in the yard, you've memorized the creaks in the floorboards. All of that builds emotional weight. That weight becomes mistaken for value. So when someone makes an offer to buy it, you think it's too low. They don't see what you see, and you feel like they're wrong. You can even see this effect in digital spaces. People who create playlists, customize avatars, or design virtual homes often feel attached to their choices. A song on a stranger's playlist is just a song, but the same track on your own playlist feels different. That's because it's part of something you built, something that reflects you. Ownership does something subtle but powerful. It changes the way your brain processes value. It adds invisible layers of meaning, even when there's no rational reason. And this isn't a flaw, it's just how humans work. The mind seeks stability, familiarity, continuity. Once something becomes part of your world, even in a small way, it starts to feel essential. Letting it go feels like losing a piece of yourself. This effect can also trap you. If you've ever tried to sell something secondhand, like a phone, a car, or a piece of furniture, you've probably felt it. You list the item, you set a price, but nobody bites. They say it's too expensive. You're confused. You think, this is a good deal. It's in great shape. But your idea of great shape might be based on personal memories, not market value. You remember the trips you took in that car. You remember the nights you listened to music on that speaker. That makes the item feel more special. Buyers don't see those memories. They just see wear and tear. Even decisions at work can reflect this. Managers often favor plans or proposals they created themselves, even when better options exist. Why? Because the plan feels like their own. They shaped it, they defended it. That attachment creates blind spots. It makes it harder to pivot or accept criticism. The plan feels like a reflection of them, not just a set of ideas on paper. The same thing happens in creative fields. Writers, designers, artists, they all know the pain of editing their own work. Cutting a sentence or scrapping a sketch feels like throwing away part of yourself. That's the endowment effect at work. You've invested time, thought, emotion. You don't want to lose that, even if it means the final result might be better without it. There's also a flip side. The things you don't own often seem less important, even when they're not. That's why people sometimes treat public spaces carelessly. A park bench, a shared workspace, a hotel room, they don't feel like yours, so your brain assigns them less value. You treat them differently, maybe less gently, less respectfully. It's not always conscious. It's just how the mind splits the world into two groups, mine and not mine. But here's the twist. The endowment effect doesn't just apply to physical things. It also affects your time, your routines, your sense of self. If you've been doing something for years, driving the same route, eating the same breakfast, believing the same story, you may start to value it more than it deserves. Not because it's the best option, but because it's yours. You built it. You've lived with it. Change becomes harder. Not because change is bad, but because it feels like a loss. This is why breaking habits is so difficult. Even unhelpful ones carry the weight of ownership. They've become part of your identity. Giving them up feels like erasing something personal. And that's where the endowment effect hides in plain sight. It shows up in your resistance to letting go. Not because what you're holding is good, but because it's familiar. Understanding this effect doesn't mean you can avoid it completely, but it gives you a moment of pause. When you find yourself clinging to something, an object, an idea, a way of doing things, you can ask, do I value this because it's useful, or just because it's mine? That simple question can loosen the grip. It doesn't need to change your mind, but it might open a little space, enough to see things more clearly, enough to make room for something new. You see a door marked "Do Not Enter." Now you want to open it. It didn't matter 5 seconds ago. You weren't even interested in what was behind it. But the moment someone told you that you couldn't go in, something changed. That door became important, not because of what's behind it, but because you were told you can't. This is called reactance. It happens when your freedom to choose is threatened, even just a little. You push back, sometimes without thinking. Not because the option was valuable before, but because now you feel like your control is slipping away. Picture this. You're on a diet. You've done fine for a week. You weren't even thinking about cake. Then someone says, "You can't eat that cake, remember?" Suddenly, cake is all you want. Not because you're hungry, not because you were craving it, but because someone reminded you that you're not supposed to have it. That small reminder pushes your brain to protect your freedom. It turns restriction into temptation. You feel this when a rule is too strict. You feel it when someone says, "Don't look," or "Don't ask questions," or "You're not allowed." You might not care about the thing itself, but now you feel the need to prove that you're still in charge. Reactance isn't about the thing you want, it's about the feeling of being told no. It shows up in small moments. A parent tells a teenager, "You're not going out tonight." Now, the teenager wants to go out more than anything, even if they didn't have plans before. The rule creates desire, not the activity. You tell someone not to read something, and they'll want to read it. You ban a book, it becomes a bestseller. You hide information, people search for it. You restrict something, people value it more. The pressure creates interest. It also happens when choices are taken away. Let's say you're buying a shirt. You see one you like, but you're not sure. Then the clerk says, "That's the last one." You feel the pull. Now it matters more. You feel the pressure to decide quickly, and that pressure can turn into desire. You weren't excited before, but now you feel like you have to act before someone else does. Reactance makes people resist warnings, rules, restrictions, and advice. Not because they disagree, but because they don't like being told what to do. That's why reverse psychology works. You say, "You probably won't like this show," and suddenly they want to see it. You say, "You probably couldn't handle this," and they want to prove you wrong. It's not magic. It's just how the mind responds to a blocked path. Sometimes this happens even when the warning is helpful. Someone says, "Don't touch that. It's hot." You still want to touch it. A sign says, "Do not walk on the grass." You feel the urge to step on it. You weren't planning to before, but now it's in your head. Reactance isn't logical. It's emotional. It's quick. It's built into how we protect our sense of freedom. And the less choice we feel we have, the stronger it gets. It can backfire in relationships. If you try to control your partner too much, they might start pulling away. Not because they don't care, but because they want to feel free again. If you say, "Don't talk to that person," they might start texting them. Not out of interest, but out of resistance. You didn't just tell them what not to do. You reminded them they're not in control. It happens in politics too. People push back when they feel government rules are too heavy. Even if the rule is smart, even if it's safe. If the rule feels too tight, people look for ways to break it. It happens with health advice. A person hears, "You can't eat this," and they start craving it. They hear, "You must exercise every day," and they suddenly want to do nothing. The brain hears the command and starts testing the fence. The brain likes choice, even bad choices, even small ones. That's why it helps to offer options instead of orders. Instead of saying, "You must do this," you say, "Here are two ways to do it." Instead of banning something, you explain why it's limited. People feel better when they understand the reason behind the restriction, when they feel like they're part of the choice, not just reacting to it. Reactance is stronger in some people than others. Some people are more sensitive to control. They grew up with too many rules, or they've lived in systems that took away their agency. So even small rules now feel like big threats. And when that pressure builds, they rebel, not always in big ways, but in subtle ones. Silence, distance, passive resistance. They won't say they're upset, they just start slipping away. Sometimes people do the opposite of what they're told just to remind themselves that they can. The strange thing is, reactance doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like instinct. You don't think, "I'm being controlled." You just feel uncomfortable, uneasy, restless. You want to break the rule, even if you don't know why. You want to test it just a little. You want to move in the opposite direction because that direction feels like freedom. And that's the core of it. We're wired to protect our freedom, even if we don't need to, even if the thing we're fighting against is small or even helpful. You might have felt it when someone tried to help you too forcefully. You might have felt it when someone talked over you or made a decision for you. You might have felt it when someone offered good advice, but in a way that made you feel smaller. It's not the advice that bothers you, it's the feeling of being directed. Even reminders can trigger it. You should really get more sleep. Now you feel wide awake. You should really call your parents. Now you want to wait even longer. You need to start being on time. Suddenly, you feel like showing up late on purpose. You weren't planning to resist, but something in you does. You don't like being nudged. You don't like the idea that someone else is steering your wheel. Reactance is subtle, but it's strong, and it happens in the smallest moments. A suggestion, a warning, a rule. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet feeling, a hidden defiance. You nod, you agree, but something in you pulls the other way, just enough to feel like you're still you. And that feeling, the need to protect your space, your freedom, your right to choose, it never really goes away, even when the stakes are small, even when no one else notices, even when you're the only one fighting back. You might not win anything by resisting, but in that moment, you feel like you're holding on to something important, something that belongs only to you. You walk into a room and say something you believe. Maybe it's a political opinion. Maybe it's the way you think people should live. You say it with confidence because in your mind it's obvious. Common sense, even. You don't doubt it. And somewhere, without saying it out loud, you assume the people around you agree, or at least most of them do. That's the false consensus effect. You believe your way of thinking is the norm, but it might not be, and often it isn't. The false consensus effect is quiet. It doesn't feel like an idea you picked up. It feels like the truth. It wraps itself around your worldview and gives you comfort, because it's easier to go through the world believing others think like you. It means you're not alone. It means your ideas are safe. And more than anything, it means you're right, or at least not wrong. Imagine you're at a dinner table with 5 people. You bring up a topic. Let's say something about work ethic. You say, I think people who don't work full-time just don't try hard enough. You don't mean it cruelly. You just believe it. You're sure everyone at the table agrees, or if they don't, they should. You look around and no one challenges you. One person nods, the others stay quiet. You take that silence as agreement. You walk away thinking, most people feel the same way I do. But maybe one person disagreed and didn't want to argue. Maybe another was unsure. Maybe someone was uncomfortable. The room didn't agree with you. It just didn't disagree out loud. That's how the false consensus effect works. It's not about facts. It's about perception. It's about the way we interpret silence, nods, shrugs, or even passive agreement as proof that our thinking is the default. And it doesn't stop there. It shapes our behavior. When we think our views are shared by the majority, we're more likely to speak them out loud. We're more likely to defend them. We're more likely to dismiss people who disagree because we think they're on the fringe. But in truth, they might not be. We might be the fringe. This illusion shows up in small places. You scroll through your social feed and see posts that line up with your beliefs. You nod to yourself. People get it, you think. But you forget the algorithm isn't a mirror of reality. It's a loop. It shows you more of what you already engage with. It rewards your clicks by confirming your thoughts. You don't notice the bubble forming. You just notice how comfortable it feels inside it. The effect also grows stronger in groups. If you're part of a community that shares your values, you start to forget how different the outside world might be. If everyone around you agrees, it becomes harder to imagine that disagreement exists. If it does, you label it as rare, misguided, or even dangerous. But you're not seeing the full picture. You're seeing a filtered one. Even in casual conversations, this bias can appear. You make a joke. No one laughs, but no one says it was wrong. You assume the joke was fine. You assume it landed. Later, someone tells you it made them uncomfortable. You're confused. But no one said anything, you reply. Silence again, mistaken for agreement. Again, you assume your view is the shared one. Again, you trust consensus where there was none. The mind likes shortcuts, it likes patterns, it likes to save energy. Assuming that others agree with you is one of those shortcuts. It prevents friction, it allows you to act without second guessing, but it can lead to poor decisions. If you think most people support your idea, you might push it forward without feedback. You might dismiss warnings. You might create tension without realizing it. And when that tension finally shows, it feels like a surprise. But it was there all along. There's also something about self-image here. If you believe something and you assume most people agree, it validates you. It tells you you're on the right side. It makes you feel safer, more certain. But that safety is fragile. It's built on assumption. And the moment you're faced with real disagreement, the illusion starts to crack. You feel defensive. You feel misunderstood. You might double down, not because the argument is strong, but because it threatens your sense of belonging. Think about everyday decisions: what brand you buy, what jokes you tell, what values you share in public. Often, you assume they're neutral, uncontroversial, widely accepted, but someone else might see them as bold, strange, or even offensive. That gap in perception is the false consensus effect in action. It's not about being wrong or right. It's about overestimating how many people are on your side. You think your thoughts are common. You think your way of seeing the world is normal. And you forget that normal isn't universal. It's local. It's shaped by your environment, your friends, your experiences. Step outside of that, and suddenly, everything looks different. This effect can be subtle. You might hear someone say something completely different from your belief, and you don't think, maybe I'm in the minority. Instead, you think that person is confused. Or worse, you think they're trying to be provocative. But maybe they're just part of a different circle, one where their belief is the consensus. They're not wrong. You're not wrong. You're both just trapped in separate realities, each thinking yours is the default. And this isn't limited to opinions. It happens with behavior too. You think it's normal to eat dinner late, or wake up early, or text during meals, or speak your mind. But other people might see those as strange. You don't question them because you've always done them, and because the people around you do them too. That's the thing. Most of our norms are shaped by repetition and comfort. The false consensus effect turns repetition into reality. It doesn't ask, is this true for everyone? It asks, is this true for me and a few people I know? And then it answers, good enough. This can create blind spots. You enter new spaces and act the way you always do. But something's off. The room feels different. People don't respond the way you expect. You feel judged or alienated. But maybe, just maybe, your version of normal doesn't match theirs. That realization can be uncomfortable, but it's also freeing. It means you can adjust, you can learn, you can move beyond the trap of assumed agreement. You don't have to guess what everyone thinks. You can ask, you can observe, you can get curious. The false consensus effect thrives on assumptions. The moment you replace assumption with attention, the illusion weakens. The world is full of people who think differently than you. Not better, not worse, just different. And that's not a threat. It's a mirror. It shows you how small your circle really is, how specific your experience is, and how many versions of truth are walking around at any given time. You can still believe what you believe, but you don't have to believe that everyone else believes it too. You sit across from someone explaining something you've known for years. Maybe it's how to set up a microphone, how to cook rice without burning it, or how a simple circuit works. You think you're being clear. You slow your words. You repeat things. But they just don't get it. And somewhere inside, you feel a subtle frustration rise. Not anger. Just this strange, quiet disbelief. How can they not see what you're seeing? That's the curse of knowledge. It sounds like some mystical affliction, but it's really just a bias, a common mental trap. Once you know something, it becomes almost impossible to remember what it felt like not to know it. You lose access to your old beginner's mind. You lose the ability to imagine the confusion, the uncertainty, or even the questions you once had. Knowledge rewrites your memory. It happens in classrooms every day. A math teacher explains how to factor a quadratic. To them, it's automatic. They see the numbers and instinctively know what to do. But the students? They're staring at symbols, searching for meaning. The teacher says this part is obvious and moves on. But it isn't obvious. It only feels obvious when you already know how it works. That's the trap. The more we know, the worse we become at communicating that knowledge to someone who doesn't. You don't need to be a teacher to fall into this. It happens in daily conversations, relationships, at work, in casual chats. You explain how to use a new app to your parents. You tell your friend how to set up their email signature. You give instructions to a new hire at your job. You're confident. You assume your words are enough. You forget all the little steps your brain does automatically, the parts you never had to explain because you don't even notice them anymore. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're clapping a tune in your head, say, Happy Birthday. You tap it out on the table while someone else tries to guess what it is. In your mind, the melody is loud and clear. You're hearing it as you tap. But to them, it's just random knocking. You might think, how do they not hear it? It's obvious. But they aren't hearing the tune in your mind. They're only hearing the taps. This was a real experiment. The people tapping expected the guessers to get it right about 50% of the time. In reality, it was closer to 2.5%. That's the curse of knowledge in action. Now think about how this applies to writing an instruction manual, building a tutorial, or onboarding someone new. You might skip over a key step without realizing it. You might say, just click here, without saying why or what happens next. You might leave out context that feels unnecessary to you, but is essential to them. You assume shared knowledge that doesn't exist. And when they get lost, you think they're not paying attention. But the truth is, you're just speaking from a place they haven't reached yet. This isn't about intelligence, it's about perspective. When you know the path, you don't look down at your feet anymore. You forget the stones, the turns, the moments you hesitated. But for someone new, every step is unknown. They need markers, they need reassurance. They need things broken down in a way that you no longer think to do. The curse of knowledge also shows up in writing. A software developer writes documentation that only makes sense if you're already a developer. A lawyer writes a contract that a normal person can't read without a translator. A doctor explains a condition using medical terms that mean nothing to the patient. In each case, the expert doesn't intend to confuse. They just forget what it's like to not know. They forget the starting point. You see it in politics, too. A policy expert talks on TV and assumes the audience knows the background. They skip past the why and jump to the therefore. They use terms that feel everyday to them but foreign to the viewer. The result is confusion, disconnection, and often mistrust. People assume the expert is being vague or hiding something, when really, they just didn't realize how much context was missing. And in tech, it's everywhere. A company builds a new product. To the team who made it, everything feels intuitive. The interface makes sense. The buttons are in the right place. But then users get frustrated. They can't find the settings. They tap the wrong icon. They abandon the app. Why? Because the designers built it with knowledge they already had. They saw the finished puzzle while everyone else was seeing scattered pieces. Now zoom in on personal relationships. You've had an experience, maybe a tough one, grief, heartbreak, burnout. Then someone else goes through it and they're confused, overwhelmed, unsure. You try to help, you give advice, but some part of you can't fully connect to their confusion. You've already made sense of it. You've already healed. Your version of that pain is stored and named and framed. Theirs is still raw and shapeless. And if you're not careful, your words won't land. Not because you don't care, but because you can't fully remember what the fog felt like. This bias also messes with how we judge others. When someone struggles with something you find easy, it's tempting to think they're not trying hard enough. You might say, it's not that hard, or just do it this way. But that's not fair. You're looking at the problem with a map they don't have. Your solution only makes sense when you already know where the path leads. So what do? How do you fight the curse of knowledge? You slow down. You listen. You ask questions instead of giving instructions. You remember the moments when you were lost, when something didn't click right away, and try to tap back into that feeling. You pay attention to what the other person doesn't say, because that's often where the gap is. You test your assumptions. You imagine explaining it to a version of yourself from years ago. What words would you need? What images helped you understand? Teaching is the best antidote. Not standing in front of a room, but real teaching, where someone doesn't get it and you have to try again and again and again. Each time, you're forced to break your knowledge into pieces, to strip it back to its bones. And every time you do that, you get a little closer to escaping the curse. You never lose the knowledge you've gained, but you can learn to carry it differently. Not as something to throw down like a ladder, but as something you walk back with, step by step, until you meet someone exactly where they are. And from there, you climb together. You hear a kind word. It feels nice, a small smile maybe, but when someone says something critical or cold, it lingers. It keeps coming back when you're alone. It pops up before sleep. You try to let it go, but it doesn't let you go. That's not just sensitivity. That's how your brain works. The mind holds onto the bad more tightly than it holds onto the good. This is called the negativity bias. It means negative experiences have a stronger impact on your brain than positive ones of the same intensity. A compliment might pass over you like a breeze, but an insult can stay like a shadow. It's not your fault. This comes from how humans evolved. Thousands of years ago, early humans lived in dangerous conditions. Being alert to threats, rustling bushes, dangerous animals, sudden storms helped them survive. A person who paid more attention to risks than rewards was more likely to stay alive. Over time, the brain adapted. It started scanning for danger, focusing on bad outcomes, holding on to fear more than joy. That same wiring is still in you, even though the world has changed. Imagine this. You get feedback on your work. There are 10 comments. 9 are positive. 1 is critical. Your brain will likely focus on that one. It loops it. It wonders what it means. You might forget the 9 kind ones completely. This is the negativity bias at work. It doesn't matter that the positive feedback outweighed the negative. That one small criticism feels louder, heavier, sharper. Here's another example. Think about the news. It's full of disasters, crimes, failures. Why? Because people pay more attention to those stories. The media isn't just trying to scare you. It's responding to what the brain grabs onto. Good news doesn't hold your attention the same way. Bad news pulls you in because your mind treats it as a possible threat. And threats feel urgent. Even in memory, negativity stays longer. If someone asks you to recall a bad day and a good day, it's often easier to describe the bad one in detail. You remember who said what went wrong, how it felt. The body might even respond again. The stomach tightens, the chest feels heavier. Meanwhile, the good days blur. They become soft around the edges, pleasant but vague. This bias shows up in relationships too. In a long-term partnership, one harsh word can damage days of connection. People argue, then forget why they were even mad, but the feeling stays. A look, a tone, a comment that cuts. The brain replays it. It does this because it thinks it's protecting you. It wants to keep you away from pain in the future, so it replays the pain from the past. You might notice this with strangers as well. 100 people pass you on the street without incident. One person bumps into you and mutters something rude. That one moment sticks. Later, when thinking about your day, you remember the rude comment, not the 99 calm interactions. That's the mind collecting what it thinks you need to avoid next time. In your own inner thoughts, the bias can distort your self-image. If you make a mistake, you might think about it for days. Even if you did many things right, the brain doesn't weigh them equally. A mistake is seen as a risk. The mind flags it. It magnifies it. It wants to learn from it so it doesn't happen again. But often, this turns into rumination, going over the same thought without resolution. Negativity bias doesn't mean you're negative. It doesn't mean you're pessimistic. It means your brain is doing something natural, something it was designed to do. But just because it's natural doesn't mean it always helps. In modern life, this bias can lead to anxiety, stress, low self-worth. It makes the mind seem like an unfair judge, one that overlooks success but never forgets failure. Think about how this works online. You might post something, a video, a photo, a thought. It gets dozens of likes, a few kind comments, then one negative reply. Maybe it's rude, maybe it's unfair, but that's the one your mind highlights. You click on it, read it again. You might even wonder if they're right. You forget the kindness. You forget the support. One line from one person shifts your whole emotional state. This bias can also affect decision-making. If you try something new and it doesn't go well, The brain will flag that as dangerous. You may hesitate to try again, even if it's something you want. The brain is trying to help you avoid discomfort, but it often overreacts. It remembers emotional pain as if it were physical danger. The more intense the bad experience, the more the brain holds on to it. Socially, this means people are more sensitive to rejection than they are to acceptance. If someone ignores you, it hurts more than it feels good when someone includes you. Being left out burns deeper than being welcomed feels warm. And so the brain starts scanning for signs of rejection even before it happens. It prepares you to avoid it. But that preparation often creates stress, even when nothing is wrong. Even your inner voice can be shaped by this. The things you say to yourself, they often come from old criticism. Teachers, parents, peers, strangers. The brain keeps those words, especially if they were sharp or repeated. They can become part of how you think, even if they were never true. A brain wired for threat keeps old warnings alive, long after the threat is gone. The negativity bias can even change how you interpret neutral situations. If someone doesn't text back, you might assume they're upset, bored, or disinterested. Your mind fills in the blanks with negative meaning. You don't think maybe they're busy or just forgot. You jump to the worst outcome because your brain sees that as safer. It thinks predicting pain protects you. But often, it just makes you anxious. There's also the echo effect. One bad moment can affect how you see everything else around it. A bad commute, and the whole day feels ruined. A small argument, and suddenly you remember every other argument. It builds. One negative event opens the door for more to enter, even if they don't belong. The brain looks for patterns, and if it finds a negative one, it follows it. Even the body reacts. Negative thoughts can tighten muscles, shorten breath, raise the heart rate. The brain and body aren't separate. When your thoughts focus on fear, shame, anger, or sadness, the body responds as if real danger is present. Over time, this creates tension, fatigue, even illness. A moment of stress becomes a state of stress. The negativity bias also influences how you talk to others. You might share bad news more often than good news. You might remember bad things people told you more clearly than kind things. When telling stories, you might focus on problems over solutions. The mind likes to share what it sees as urgent, and bad news always feels more urgent than good news. Even in your dreams, negative events are more likely to appear. Nightmares are more vivid than pleasant dreams. This may be the mind's way of continuing to process threats, even when you sleep. It prepares for danger over and over, long after the danger is gone. What's strange is how invisible this all feels. You don't notice the bias when it's happening. You just feel like you're being honest with yourself or that you're seeing the truth clearly. But often, the truth is being filtered through this ancient lens, one that sees danger, even where there is none. You're not broken for thinking this way. You're human. Every brain is wired to remember pain longer than pleasure, to expect threat more than peace, to guard against loss more than it celebrates gain. The mind means well, but sometimes it holds on too tightly to things we should have let pass. You spend your weekend putting together a desk. The instructions are vague. One of the screws is missing. You use a knife as a screwdriver. It takes 3 hours, and when it's done, it wobbles just a little. But you look at it and think, it's not so bad. In fact, you kind of like it. Now imagine walking into a store and seeing the exact same desk. Pre-built, no hassle, no instructions, no sweat. But strangely, you feel less attached to that one. You didn't build it. You don't know its flaws. You didn't get frustrated halfway through and curse at the tiny wrench that came in the box. This is what psychologists call the IKEA effect. When you build something yourself, you tend to value it more, even if it's not great. Even if it's worse than a professionally made version, your effort becomes part of the thing. The time you spent gives it meaning. It becomes more than just an object. It becomes yours. This happens all the time. Think about someone who's written a novel. Maybe it's not very good. The plot doesn't go anywhere. The dialogue sounds stiff, but to the writer, it's brilliant. They spent months on it, maybe years. They stayed up late editing. They rewrote whole chapters. It means something to them. It's hard to take criticism of it, not because they think it's perfect, but because they built it. Or consider a parent helping their kid build a science project. The volcano doesn't erupt. The papier-mâché is lumpy. but they worked on it together and they're proud of it. They see effort, not outcome. They see the memory of the process, not the flaws. Even people who cook their own meals experience this. You follow a recipe, you chop the vegetables, you taste the sauce. It's too salty, but you still enjoy it more than if you'd ordered takeout. You don't compare it to a restaurant. You compare it to the time always aware that we're doing this. The mind doesn't say, I like this because I made it. It just quietly attaches value to effort, even flawed effort. Especially flawed effort. In one study, people were asked to fold origami. Some were given complex patterns. Some didn't do very well. But afterward, when asked to rate how much the origami was worth, the builders said it was more valuable than those who just looked at the finished pieces. Even when the folds were messy and the paper was torn, they still believed what they made had more worth. And it wasn't just about pride. It was about ownership. They didn't just see paper and shapes. They saw time, effort, and frustration. They saw their hands in the work. This can be useful. It can encourage people to try, to make things, to care about outcomes. If you assemble your own bookshelf, you're more likely to take care of it. You might even tell people proudly, yeah, I built that, even if you had to rebuild the top shelf 3 times, even if it leans a little to the left. But it can also trap you. It can blind you to the flaws in what you've made. If someone else criticizes it, you feel like they're criticizing you, not the thing. You become defensive, not because the object is good, but because your work is in it. This happens in business, in relationships, in creative work. A manager launches a new idea. It's not working, but they poured time into it. So they defend it. They keep pushing it. They won't let it go. Because to them, admitting it failed is like admitting their effort was wasted. The more they invest, the harder it is to stop. You see the same pattern in people who renovate their homes. They spend weeks painting, installing floors, hanging shelves. When someone says the color scheme looks strange, they don't just disagree. They feel hurt, because their energy lives in those walls now. It's not just paint, it's their weekend, their tools, their patience. This attachment to effort can also change how we judge others. If you give someone a gift, you often feel more connected to them. But if you make the gift yourself, that connection gets even stronger. The recipient might not care as much, but for you, it means more. You put yourself into it. You spent time shaping it. Even if it's simple, it feels significant. Parents experience this with children too. Raising a child is the ultimate long-term project. The sleepless nights, the school pickups, the scraped knees, the arguments, the thousands of decisions. Over time, all of that effort becomes love. Not just because of biology or instinct, but because effort deepens connection. You value what you invest in. That's the IKEA effect at a massive scale. But again, the effect works both ways. It can cloud your judgment. Say you built a business. It was your idea from the start. You stayed up late working on it. You skipped vacations. You borrowed money. Now it's struggling. Someone suggests pivoting, changing the core idea, maybe even shutting it down. That's not just a business decision. It feels personal, because the business is tied to your time, your choices, your energy. You don't see it objectively anymore. You see your effort inside of it. Even in arguments, this shows up. You defend your point, not always because it's the best one, but because you've spent time crafting it. You've thought it through. You've rehearsed it in your head. And when someone disagrees, you feel like they're undoing that work, dismissing your effort. So instead of rethinking the idea, you double down. There's something very human about this. We're not machines. We don't just calculate value based on outcome. We attach meaning to process. We romanticize the struggle. We glorify the DIY spirit. We fall in love with what we create, even when it's imperfect. But knowing this can help us step back sometimes. It reminds us to pause before reacting, before assuming our work is great just because it was hard, before getting defensive when someone doesn't like what we made. It's okay to care about effort. It's natural. But it's also useful to recognize when effort is blinding us, when we're holding on to something just because we built it, when we can't let go, not because it's good, but because it's ours. The IKEA effect shows us that what we build feels more valuable, not because it is more valuable, but because we see ourselves in it. And sometimes that's enough, but other times it gets in the way. The tricky part is knowing the difference. You walk into a coffee shop, you've been here before. Same barista, same table in the corner, same drink you've ordered 100 times. You glance at the menu, there's a new seasonal drink. You think about trying it. Then you order what you always do. You don't even question it. That's the familiarity trap. It's not just coffee shops. It's how you choose what to wear, where to sit, what route to drive. It's the same shows, the same food, the same conversations, even the same thoughts running in your mind. You lean toward what feels familiar, not what makes the most sense. And most of the time, you don't notice you're doing it. Imagine standing in front of two doors. One leads to something new, something you've never tried. The other leads somewhere you've been many times. You already know what to expect. Maybe it's not exciting, maybe it's not even enjoyable, but it's safe, it's known, and that's enough to make you choose it again. You don't need a good reason, you just need a pattern. This is how the brain works. It's not about what's best, it's about what feels stable. Familiar things require less thinking, less risk, less energy. In a world where your brain is always trying to keep you safe, it sees the unknown as a threat, even when it isn't. So it gently nudges you toward what you've already done. It's not loud, it's not forceful, it just whispers, "Let's do what we did yesterday." Now think about how many choices in your day follow this pattern. You open your phone and go straight to the same 3 apps. You scroll the same feeds. You listen to the same playlists, not because they're your favorites, but because they're already there. You've already told your brain that these are safe paths. So it builds habits, and those habits build a kind of mental shortcut. You don't think, you just do. But not thinking has a cost. It means you don't notice better paths. You don't try new options. You don't explore. You don't change. There's a psychological name for this tendency: status quo bias. It means people prefer things to stay the way they are, even when change might bring something better. You'd think humans would always pick the better choice if they had the facts. But that's not what happens. When something is unfamiliar, it feels risky, even if it's better on paper, even if it's logically the right move. Consider this example. You go to a restaurant and always order the same dish. One day, you look at the menu and see something you've never tried. It looks good. You ask the waiter about it. They say it's one of the most popular dishes. You consider it. But in the end, you stick with your usual. You tell yourself, "At least I know I'll like it." You walk out of the restaurant not because you chose the best meal, but because you chose the safest one. Or think about relationships. You keep someone in your life because they've been there a long time. Maybe they don't support you, maybe they don't challenge you, but they're familiar. You know how they talk, you know how they react. Starting over with someone else would mean building something from scratch. So you stay, not because it's good, but because it's known. Now take a look at work. You've been doing the same tasks, using the same systems, following the same processes. You've thought about suggesting a new way, something more efficient, but it would take time to learn, time to convince people, time to adjust. So you don't. You do what you've always done, because it's easier, and because easy feels right, even when it's wrong. The familiarity trap is subtle. It hides inside routines. It wears the mask of comfort. It tells you that sticking with what you know is smart. It sounds like, "Don't rock the boat." It sounds like, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But the truth is, sometimes it is broken. You've just gotten used to it. There's a version of this trap in your thoughts too. You replay the same worries. You react the same way to conflict. You fall into the same emotional patterns, even when they don't serve you, even when they wear you down. Your brain would rather repeat a bad pattern than try a new one it can't predict. And here's the twist. Every time you choose the familiar, you make it stronger. Your brain rewards it. It says, "Good job avoiding uncertainty." And the trap tightens. The more you choose it, the harder it is to break out. Imagine someone who's afraid of public speaking. The first time they turn down a chance to speak, they feel relieved. The second time, it's a little easier to say no. The third time, they don't even think about saying yes. They just avoid it altogether. That's not fear being managed. That's the familiarity trap getting deeper. It doesn't always feel bad. That's what makes it hard to notice. It feels neutral, routine, normal. You don't question it because it's always been there. but it limits you. It shrinks your range of experience. It tells you this is who you are, and you believe it because you've never tested the alternative. You might think this only applies to big life decisions, but it lives in small moments too. You pick the same seat in class. You use the same excuses. You avoid conflict because that's what you've always done. You say yes when you want to say no because it's familiar to keep the peace. All these little choices build up, and suddenly your life looks more like a loop than a path. Even your self-image gets trapped. You believe you're a shy person, or a forgetful person, or someone who can't do math, not because it's true, but because it's the story you've always told yourself. You never push against it. You never challenge it. Because to do that would mean stepping outside the known. And the known is warm, predictable, padded like a well-worn path. But here's the quiet truth. The familiar doesn't always mean safe. Sometimes it just means stuck. You've probably heard the phrase comfort zone. What most people don't say is that the comfort zone isn't just comfortable. It's sticky. It holds on to you. And it has layers. You think you're making choices, but a lot of the time you're just running a script. And that script was written by repetition, not intention. It's not that familiar things are bad. Some routines are helpful. Some habits are healthy. But when you never question them, when you never test the unfamiliar, you stop growing. You stop discovering. You settle. And settling becomes your default. So next time you catch yourself reaching for the same choice, ask why. Is it truly what you want, or is it just what you know? That's the question that starts to loosen the trap. You hear a news story about a plane crash. It's sudden, violent, and tragic. The images stay with you: twisted metal, smoke, lives lost in an instant. A week later, you're at the airport, about to board a flight. Your heart rate ticks up. You picture the crash again. You grip your seatbelt a little tighter. This is the availability heuristic at work. It's your brain's way of estimating how likely something is to happen, based not on facts or statistics, but on how easily you can recall an example. If it comes to mind quickly, your brain treats it as more common, more probable, more real. It doesn't matter if the event is rare or if the story was an outlier. The fact that it pops into your head with such clarity makes it feel like a looming possibility. It's not your fault. The brain is wired to take shortcuts. You don't have time to run calculations every time you need to make a decision. So instead, your mind reaches for the nearest memory. That memory often feels like evidence, even when it isn't. You're not analyzing actual risk. You're reacting to mental vividness. Think about shark attacks. Every summer, the news covers a handful of incidents: blood in the water, a swimmer injured, dramatic footage. After one of these stories runs, beach attendants might drop. People get nervous. They picture the dorsal fin cutting through the water. But statistically, shark attacks are incredibly rare. You are more likely to be injured by a falling coconut. Still, no one's afraid to walk under a palm tree. Why? Because they've never seen that on the news. When something gets media coverage, or when it happens to someone close to you, it becomes mentally available. That story has weight. It feels close. And because it's easy to recall, it becomes distorted in your mind. You think it's frequent. You treat it like it might happen again, soon, possibly to you. The availability heuristic isn't just about fear. It works with optimism too. Imagine you just watched a video of someone winning the lottery. They're crying, hugging their family, holding a giant check. You feel a rush. You go out and buy a ticket, convinced, just for a moment, that you might win too. Why? Because you can see it. You just saw it happen. The image is fresh in your mind, and so the chance feels real. But mathematically, the odds haven't changed. Now apply this to everyday life. You're thinking of switching careers. You talk to someone who did it and failed. Their story sticks with you. You can hear the regret in their voice. You start to think, maybe this is a bad idea. But what about the hundreds of people who switched and never told anyone? What about the quiet successes that didn't make it into your circle of awareness? They're not available, so they don't influence you. That one vivid story outweighs all the invisible ones. This also shows up in relationships. One bad breakup, one betrayal, one lie, and your brain holds on to it. You meet someone new, and even if they show no red flags, your mind replays the past. The pain is easy to recall, so you assume it's likely to happen again. But memories are not probabilities. They're not forecasts, they're echoes. And sometimes they're wrong. The availability heuristic makes us think car theft is common if we know someone who had their car stolen. It makes us believe our neighborhood is unsafe if we hear about one incident, even if the stats say otherwise. It tricks us into thinking plane crashes, lottery wins, and rare diseases are more common than they are. Because those are the stories we hear. Those are the stories we see. Those are the stories that stay. Marketing uses this too. If you see the same brand over and over, your brain starts to trust it. Not because it's better, not because it's more reliable, but because it's familiar. When a product keeps popping into your awareness, you start to believe it must be popular. It must be working for others. Otherwise, why would you be seeing it so often? But repetition isn't proof. It's just exposure. The more something comes up, the more real it feels. That's the bias. Not truth, not accuracy, just mental availability. Think of how this plays out during arguments. One person brings up a past mistake. It's vivid, it's emotional. Because they can remember it clearly, it feels central. But they might be forgetting 10 other moments that contradict it. Those don't come to mind as fast. They don't pack the same punch. So the argument leans on what's easy to recall, not on what's balanced or fair. Memory plays tricks on you. Some memories come with volume. Others fade to a whisper. But volume doesn't mean truth. Loud doesn't mean common. Intensity doesn't mean frequency. These are separate things, but your brain treats them as one. The availability heuristic also influences how we treat other people. If you hear about crime committed by a certain group, and that image gets repeated enough, your brain starts to associate that group with danger, even if the reality is different, even if the numbers don't support it. The image is strong, and it becomes a stand-in for reality. This is how bias takes root. It's not always about hate. Sometimes it's just repetition. Sometimes it's just mental shortcuts that were never corrected. The human brain is deeply visual. It remembers stories, not spreadsheets. So we fall for emotional scenes and dramatic moments while forgetting silent data. A natural disaster covered in the news feels more dangerous than a slow-growing health condition that kills more people. We fear explosions more than lifestyle diseases. But the numbers tell a different story. Now imagine you're making decisions about your health, your safety, your career, your relationships, and every one of those decisions is shaped by a small set of memories. Not facts, not trends, just whatever your mind grabs first. That's the reality of the availability heuristic. It's subtle, it's sneaky, and it feels like common sense. But it's not. The irony is, once you know about this, you'll start to notice it everywhere. You'll hear someone say, "That always happens," when it actually happened once, loudly. You'll catch yourself avoiding things because of one dramatic story. You'll realize how often your thoughts are shaped by the last thing you heard, not the full picture. You don't need to shut your mind off to these memories, but you can pause, you can question, you can ask, is this just easy to remember? Or is it truly likely? Is this my fear talking, or is it a real risk? And sometimes, all it takes is that question to break the loop. You see a face once. It doesn't leave much of an impression. You see it again the next day, and something shifts. By the third or fourth time, it feels familiar. Not special, not amazing, just known. And known feels safe. That's the mere exposure effect. The idea that the more you're exposed to something, the more you tend to like it, not because it's objectively better, but because your brain recognizes it. That recognition builds comfort, and comfort often feels like trust. This plays out all around you, every single day. Think about music. The first time you hear a song, it might feel strange or even boring. But if it plays again and again, on the radio, in a store, in someone's car, you might catch yourself humming it. You start to remember the melody, then the lyrics. Eventually, you don't just tolerate the song, you like it. You sing along, you seek it out. And the song didn't change. You did. That same thing happens with people. The more often you see someone, even just in passing, the more likely you are to feel a sense of ease around them. You might not know anything about them. You might never speak. But if you see their face at work, at school, in your neighborhood, or even just online, your mind starts to label them as safe. And from there, it's a short distance to friendly or likable. It's not about logic, it's about repetition. And repetition, to the human brain, often feels like truth. Advertisers understand this deeply. That's why they pay huge amounts of money to show you the same logo, the same slogan, the same jingle over and over again. Not because they think you'll be persuaded by a single ad, but because the more times you're exposed to the brand, the more likely you are to feel familiar with it. And that familiarity softens your skepticism. It opens the door. It's subtle. You don't notice it happening. You just suddenly find yourself reaching for the brand you've seen the most without asking why. You choose the coffee shop you pass every day. You pick the cereal that's been in commercials since you were a kid. You vote for the name that sounds more familiar on a ballot, and most of the time, you don't even realize you're doing it. This effect doesn't just apply to products and people, it also applies to ideas. If you hear the same opinion often enough from different sources or repeated by the same voice, your mind starts to accept it more easily. Not because it's been proven, not because you've tested it, just because it's no longer unfamiliar. An unfamiliar idea feels like a risk. A familiar one feels like a resting place. This is one reason why conspiracy theories can spread. When people are exposed to the same claim over and over, especially in isolated spaces like social media bubbles, they start to believe it. It becomes familiar. It becomes easy to recall. And the brain equates easy to recall with likely to be true. There's a kind of mental shortcut happening here. Your brain saves energy by trusting what it's seen before. If something has shown up repeatedly without causing harm, your mind assumes it's probably okay. That assumption builds over time until it becomes preference, even affection. Let's say you walk into a bookstore. You've never heard of most of the authors, but then you see a name that you've seen on posters or in a magazine or mentioned by someone you follow. Without thinking about it, your eye lingers there. You might pick up the book. You might read the back. You're more likely to give it a chance, not because the writing is better, but because the name is familiar. The same thing happens on dating apps. Profiles that appear often or show up in multiple places tend to get more attention. Again, not because the people are more compatible, but because their presence becomes familiar. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort often feels like attraction. You've probably experienced this with movies too. You didn't really want to watch it at first, but then a few friends mentioned it. Then you saw a clip on social media, then a meme, then a trailer. At some point, you gave in. You watched it, you liked it more than you expected, but maybe it wasn't the movie that changed. It was you. You crossed a threshold from unfamiliar to familiar, and that changed how open you were to enjoying it. The mere exposure effect also works in reverse. Things that are unfamiliar can feel uncomfortable, even threatening. That's part of why people are slow to accept change. It's not always because they disagree. Sometimes they just haven't seen the new thing enough. The first time feels off. The second time, still strange. But the 10th time, it starts to feel normal. That's why repetition matters so much in politics, in culture, in art. It's not just about reaching people once, it's about reaching them enough. Enough for the unfamiliar to lose its sharp edges, enough for the message to settle in. This doesn't mean you're shallow. It doesn't mean your choices aren't real. It just means that your brain has built-in shortcuts to help it decide what to like, what to trust, what to ignore. And those shortcuts are heavily shaped by exposure, repetition, familiarity, even the layout of your phone apps. You probably use the ones on your home screen more, not just because they're useful, but because they're always there. You see them dozens of times a day. That constant exposure builds a kind of invisible loyalty. Imagine walking through your house in the dark. You don't see anything, but your feet know the floor. Your hand knows where the light switch is. Your body remembers, even when your eyes are closed. That's what familiarity does to your mind. It builds quiet trust in things you've seen often, even when you're not looking straight at them. The mere exposure effect is simple, but its reach is wide. It shapes your relationships, your habits, your beliefs. It turns strangers into friends. It turns neutral objects into favorites. It turns background noise into your next favorite song. And most of the time, you don't even notice it. You just feel a pull towards something you've seen before, a soft lean toward the known. That pull can be helpful. It can guide you toward comfort, routine, safety, but it can also blind you to better choices, new people, new ideas, new possibilities that just haven't had a chance to feel familiar yet. The strange thing is, once they do, they might become the very things you can't imagine living without. And all it takes is time, repetition, a few extra glances, a few more exposures, and then something unknown becomes part of your world. Not because it asked to be, just because it kept showing up.